Good evening, good morning, good night, dear listener. Once again, you have pressed up, 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 down, 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 up, 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 down, 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 up, up, up. A chime has sounded, and Tails has been called to your side. It is the Old Oil House. It is a roundtable discussion. And with me today are two men, manly men who are slightly animalistic. The first can only be described as... Play these sounds in this order. 1, 1, 2, and 4. Now move the highlight to player select and press start. You've got a Timey.
Hi. That's all I'm going to say, because I'm a douche. Oh, no, I'm joking. Hello, Adam. How you doing?
I'm okay. I'd just like to point out I'm remembering all of these off the top of my head.
Well, you know.
And the voice of a man you've just heard, a man who could only be described as 19921124. Press start, hold A, and you have a McFeely.
Well, I think it was up, down, left, right, A, and start was the level select, wasn't it?
Up, down, left, right, A, and start for Sonic 1.
Oh, you're on another one. See,
Yes.
that's the true classics. Hey, it's me. How are we all doing this evening?
Yeah, too bad, sir. And how's yourself?
I'm not so bad.
Excellent. Now, to get these two men together into one melting pot, there was only one thing we could talk about. So tonight we are going to be discussing, hopefully in some great depth, a comic that you, if you are under the age of, say, 22, maybe 20, if you are American, if you are in fact new to the Blue Hedgehog, something you had never come across, something you've probably never heard of. And my intention is to make you not only want it, but to bother Fleetway and Egremont until it gets released in some kind of official way so people can read it again. We are talking about Sonic the Comic, which was released originally in 1993.
Oh, God, I'm so old.
20 years ago.
I was 13.
Oh, Jesus.
In 1993?
Yeah, I was.
You were 13?
I was 13. I'm going to be 33 in the next couple of so weeks.
You sure you were 13?
I'm pretty certain. I could ask a friend if you want.
I think you should phone a friend about that one.
Mm.
Mel!
Nah, actually, it was a different friend because it's a nice segue of how I came across Sonic the Comic. But you'll get there in a minute.
Well, you can just hold your horses there, son. Hold your horses, because I'm about to explain what Sonic the Comic is. In 1993, Egmont Magazines, pardon me, released the first official Sega comic in the UK. Originally, the idea was to release stories on Sonic and every other official Sega video game. Eventually, though, they kind of burnt out on the idea of doing other characters, unless it was Decap Attack. And Sonic the Comic stayed with just the Sonic the Hedgehog family. It carried on right the way through till 2002. Unfortunately, the last year of it was nothing but limping along with reprints. But, you know, even so, a lot of people got to read things they might not have read otherwise.
Mm.
Now, I think that's enough of an introduction, so we'll jump straight on to Timey, as he's completely and utterly derailed my train of thought there.
Oh, I'm so sorry. You can get back on track if you want, but
No, I'm just going to jump straight on and say, give me how you came across Sonic the Comic.
By accident, purely and unadulterately by accident. I was living in South Wales at the time, because me being from Wales, of course, and I was spending most of my time going to a friend's place and playing the Sonic the Hedgehog game, of which most of the time involved him smashing his controller against the wall in a temper tantrum, me picking up the controller and then playing all the levels for him. By the way, this sort of gaming prowess I cannot do anymore. I am so crap these days, but back in the day I was pretty damn good.
That wasn't my house, was it? Because that used to happen a hell of a lot back.
Oh, unfortunately, no, it was not you, Chris. Although I suspect that anybody that was
I would
remember
if it.
I think anyone who's in the way of your controller would indeed sustain internal injuries.
Before you continue, I just want to say, Sonic the Hedgehog 2, final boss, made me snap my Mega Drive controller in half in my hands.
I know that feeling.
Carry on.
You just don't get bosses where you don't get rings anymore. It was a bad idea. It was bad, and they should have felt bad.
And yeah, one day there was two of us that came along. I think it was myself, my friend Mark, and another friend Craig. Craig bought the comic with him, and it turned out that Craig, my friend Craig Breslin, if he's listening to this, because I'm going to be sending this link his way, was a hardcore fan of the comic. He lived and breathed Sonic. I believe he even got hold of the Archie comics when they came out as well. He knew absolutely everything about Sonic and his world, so through him I kind of experienced all of that. Unfortunately, I didn't buy the comic as much as him. I was like pinching his a lot of the time in school and reading it that way. And in fact, I'll be absolutely honest, I had no idea the comic actually lasted as long until 2 years ago when I started talking to Adam about it. And he brought up the fact that he was a big Sonic fan and all of that, and the rest is history. But yeah, basically through my friend Craig Breslin, who, it's a shame he doesn't really do any podcasts, because he would have been a much better guy to have on here than me. But from what I've read, the Sonic comic is pretty cool, with some really damn dark themes. Kind of really surprising.
Well, the main strip ended up doing some very, very, very dark and very interesting stuff. And I'm fairly convinced that's because nobody was really paying attention to what they were doing. But we'll get into that later on. Chris, the same question to you, sir. How did you come across Sonic the comic?
I really don't actually remember, so that's a great story. I just remember when I finally did get it. I remember that I'd seen it around. I don't think I read about it or saw it advertised or anything. I just remember I'd seen it around, and I remember that I wanted to buy an issue. The family was going on holiday. This was in 1993. Yeah, it would have been. It was issue 6. So whenever I don't remember what month of the year the comic started in. So it was issue 6 was my first issue, and I remember that I bought that shortly after the family came back from holiday, and that was pretty much it. I was on board. Now I do remember because this wasn't something that was actually connected to Sonic the comic, but it was kind of important as far as its backstory goes, which was that I did own and had read fairly religiously the Stay Sonic Handbook.
Oh, yes.
Yes, this was the book that laid down the Kintabor origin and the breaking of the sound barrier. I mean, maybe we should drop some history on the listening audience who may not be aware of the vagaries of Sonic canon. Sega. Sega. The game is. If you played the game, there's no story. There's a blue hedgehog. There's a fat man. He makes robots. The end. That's the game. That's the first game. So the game was deliberately vague and didn't really have a story, so that all the different territories could come up with their own way of selling it. So Sega of America developed this backstory, the alien planet of Mobius, where Sonic, when he was just an ordinary brown hedgehog, an anthropomorphic brown hedgehog, encountered a kindly scientist named Ovi Kintabor and helped him to build the retroorbital chaos compressor, which would collect all the negative energy of the planet Mobius into 6 emeralds. And the experiments that Kintabor carried out on Sonic led to him breaking the sound barrier using a pair of special sneakers, which the shockwave fused his coils together and tempered them blue. And then later, this is the broad strokes version of it. Later, a malfunction in the retroorbital chaos compressor, the ROCC, resulted in an explosion that irradiated Kintabor with all the chaos energy of the emeralds and transformed him into Dr. Robotnik. And the story went from there. This didn't really get implemented in many places in American Sonic canon. I believe there was some kind of very short, one-page, maybe comic strip in a Sega magazine at some point, but they got the Archie comics and the various cartoons that took the canon off in its own direction, which really has only the most tangential resemblance to the games themselves. Whereas this version of the story, which is based very, very, very seriously on the games and the world of the games and the things in the games, was followed religiously in the UK in this handbook called Stay Sonic, and then it would be taken up by Sonic the comic and expanded upon deeply to the point that, I mean, by and large, that version of the story is most recognized for being associated with Sonic the comic. And I lived and died by this handbook anyway, to get back to the point of it. So whenever I found these stories that essentially spun out of that, I was already all over it. And it didn't hurt that issue 6, 2 issues later, we got the comic strip version of that storyline.
Mm-hmm.
So it was like I was living in this little microcosm of interconnected, and there were these novels that came out in the UK as well, which also used that as their backstory. And I only ever read one of them, which was called Sonic the Hedgehog in the Fourth Dimension. But it turned out to be a time travel story, which sent everybody back to the origin story over again. So this is deeply, deeply ingrained in my head as the proper origin of Sonic. And to cut to the end of the podcast, Sonic the comic is the reason I can't enjoy modern Sonic fiction anymore.
Right. Now, this is something I was going to bring up later on. I'm with you. I am 100% with you. As I was saying to Matt before we got started on this, there is a sequence in the Sonic Adventure game which ruins the game in my head because it doesn't do what I wanted it to, right?
Mm-hmm. Now, I've just recently played Sonic Adventure for the very first time, so this is all fresh for me.
Well, really good game. Fantastic game.
It is actually surprisingly decent.
I even like Big the Cat, damn it.
Yeah, you know that, yeah.
Well, little pollywog pal.
I don't know about this one. Okay, carrying on.
There is a sequence where Perfect Chaos rises up. He's destroyed the entirety of Station Square.
Yeah.
And he's there. Everyone runs up and they start lobbing the Chaos Emeralds at Sonic, going, "Become Super Sonic, you'll save us all." And all I wanted him to do was grab hold of Amy Rose, stuff her down Big the Cat's mouth, get Big the Cat, set him on fire, eat Tails, and then headbutt Perfect Chaos to death.
That was like the very first plot-based inclusion of Super Sonic in a game where it wasn't just the superpower Easter egg to unlock.
Yeah.
And after we would have been at nearly 10 years. What were like 7 or 8 years of Sonic the comic, teaching me that Super Sonic was the Hulk to Sonic's Bruce Banner, the Mr. Hyde to his Dr. Jekyll.
Mm-hmm.
I love the fact that Super Sonic has such a major presence in the games these days, but it's not my Super Sonic.
This is my point. I just want that game to end with him ignoring Perfect Chaos and just charging forward. Amy Rose, it's your time to die.
But I mean, in Japan, Super Sonic is just Super Saiyan Sonic. Like, that's all it is. It is just Sonic's shonen anime power-up form. It is a whole other thing, and it's just, I mean, it's one of the pretty basic distinctions between the Western approach to Sonic and the very Japanese approach to Sonic, which has, since the games have become more plot-based, taken over it and essentially forcibly been imposed on the West because they can't.
Yes,
work around the cutscenes,
including certain names. Now, I'm sorry, but he's not
Oh,
Eggman.
he's not
It is
Eggman.
Robotnik.
He is Dr. Robotnik. Dr. Ivo Robotnik, PhD.
PhD in excellence.
Villain par excellence.
We'll come to
all of that, yeah.
We'll come to a bit more in-depth stuff.
I mean, the simple fact is that although it did, like, as it went on, it would start introducing more and more quirky Britishisms and original characters. Sonic the comic was, and remains the singular piece of Sonic fiction above all others. And this is not hyperbole. This is just like facts. That actually goes out of its way to present the world of the games.
Mm-hmm.
Up until the end of the Mega Drive era, up until the Dreamcast era started, I mean. The world of the games and all the things in the games, the world of the games, zones, star posts, emeralds, rings, the TVs, badniks, the fact that there are little animals in the badniks, all of these elements of the games in fiction as they appear in the games.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nothing else does that. Nothing else puts the games on paper like that. They take the basic idea of the fact that there are robots with animals inside them, and, for instance, the Archie comics interpret that as Robotnik has a machine that actually molecularly transforms the animals into brainwashed robot versions of themselves. Which is not a bad idea, but it's not not what I'm controlling on the TV screen,
It's not in the game, and to be honest with you, slightly less horrific than the idea of the organic
Slightly.
batteries.
Slightly.
This is something that it sticks with me for years with Sonic the Comic.
It is basically a shell that basically drains the animal dry if it was allowed to get as dark as it really would have gotten.
It never does. They seem to be it's more like the Matrix, where they keep them alive in there to.
Well, it's funny you should mention the Matrix, because we're going to come to that at some point.
Oh, are we? Okay.
Oh God, we're going to come to that. I hate those movies.
Everything from, Star Posts being the way Sonic gets into the special zone, and the tubes are in there, and the emeralds go there after you bring them together, and the emeralds turn him into Super Sonic. It's just like everything as it is in the games is in Sonic the Comic. And that is why it is still the superior piece of Sonic fiction to me, because nothing else ever put the effort to make that happen into their work. It brought me that much step closer to the world of the games, and it made me feel like I was like taking part in the adventures that were happening in between the games. Because as well as all that, the games actually happened within the world of the comics. Specifically Sonic 1 and 2. I think it was in the mid-20s when they started the Sonic's World strip, and they were like, hey, Sonic 1 and 2 happened, and here's how they fit into our timeline. And I mean, I know all the other media has eventually done their adaptations of the various Sonic games, and Sonic the Comic is no more or less guilty with taking liberties with the storylines of the games to make them fit into their world, particularly Sonic Adventure, of course. But it was all about making the world of the game seem bigger and more expansive and more real and more developed, whereas everything else was about taking it off in another direction.
Well, the exception to the rule is literally the Sonic the Hedgehog's 1 and 2, they actually intersperse it in the telling of Sonic's World in the I think it was called Sonic's World, but the main exception to the rule is Sonic CD, where basically the main storyline in that is Sonic the Terminator, which happens a little bit later on in the strip. But even then, you could still say it happens in between parts of the game itself.
Well, that's like, when does Sonic CD take place in the game timeline? Who knows?
I think
it's made up anyway.
It's the only time I can say that it intersperts itself with the current game at the time. So.
Oh, well, no, sure, they did an adaptation of Sonic 3, and they did Sonic and Knuckles, and they did Flicky's Island, and they did
they did Chaotix as well, so...
They did a version of Chaotix, and they did, they did Sonic and Knuckles as well. No, they did all the major Mega Drive games, and they would do little nods towards Sonic Spinball, and then they did Sonic Adventure. Of course, it had chaos in it. It was about the only resemblance that had to the actual plot of the Sonic Adventure game.
Yeah. Well, that's when the main strip becomes its own identity away from the games at that point. It was like, we can't have that.
Yeah, it's like the games. That was whenever the Eastern Japanese storyline was pushed. There was no getting around it in the games, so it was the comic shrugged and went, fuck it, and did its own thing. Compare with, say, the Archie comic, where they suddenly had to come up with explanations for how humans and Station Square could all exist on Mobius.
They didn't. God damn it.
I know they didn't, but they did in Archie.
No. We're not going to discuss Archie. No, it's all wrong. Archie is just wrong.
I'll tell you what, though. I did read for the first time recently. I say recently, within the last year. They brought out Marvel Essentials style phone books of the Archie stuff. The first two have come out. Number 2 just came out a few weeks ago. So I decided, hey, here we go. Let's get into this. And I did wind up really enjoying it, because it is no. It's weird, because the Archie stuff is basically a funny animal book for a large part of its first year or 3, and then it does eventually transition into a more action-based storyline. But when it's doing the funny animal stuff, it's no more or less goofy than any of the stuff Lou Stringer ever did on Sonic the Comic, and that's what I realized, and I wound up really getting into it. Even though it's it's still not the same as Sonic. Because when it's doing the funny animal stuff, and it's like, oh, my Uncle Chuck invented a magic spring that spits out golden rings, and I'm like, look, I know there are rings in the game, but that's not how it works. They're a naturally occurring phenomenon that were scattered across the planet when the ROCC exploded.
Pay attention, Archie. Pay attention.
Although I've just read, because in preparation of this podcast, I recently reread a few of the early comics of Sonic the Comic, and they even bring up the fact that the rings do give Sonic some residual power. So that's a carry on from the Sonic the
all
cartoon.
Explained.
So,
I mean, there's even one storyline where you actually find out about the extra lives.
Oh my god, it's my favorite thing! It's not actually my favorite thing. There are millions of things I enjoy more than it in Sonic the Comic, but it's still brilliant, where it's like, it's an extra life, and they try to go,
It's an extra life, and it's really pissed off about being in there.
Yeah!
I love this idea. What was it called? Double Trouble.
That was the story, yeah.
Yeah, the idea is that...
Was it around issue the 13 mark, I think?
Yeah, it was in one of those strange little breaks that Elson and Kitchen took. Yeah. Allowed somebody else to come in for a couple of issues to write something, which was usually a little bit wacky and a bit odd.
I looked it up. Do you know who wrote it?
Who wrote it?
Well, it's not the only thing he ever wrote, but it's one of those really quirky, fun things about early Sonic the Comic that went away later, because he wrote a couple of... Remember that story where Sonic runs around the world? That was him, too.
Yes.
And he wrote Streets of Rage. You know him.
Mark Miller.
You love him.
Yeah, just found out myself.
The Ultimates, Kick-Ass, Wolverine, Ultimate X-Men, Mark friggin' Miller.
Civil War.
Civil War, of course. That was the other big one I couldn't think of for a second. Mark Miller. Mark Miller wrote that. Okay, carrying on.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
I've just literally read it up myself.
The thing I liked about that, apart from the sheer wacky and strangeness of that issue, is it's something that Sonic the Comic does very well that you mentioned before, Chris. It takes elements of the games and gives them a reason to exist in the world.
He's alive inside a little television.
Yep. Didn't say it wasn't wacky.
No. I'm like, it's awesome. I mean, because I don't think Sonic the Comic ever addressed this particular point, but Stay Sonic did, because I remember it, was that the TVs were an interplanetary communications network that Kintobor set up so that civilians could help him in his search for the seventh emerald, which he needed to stabilize everything he was doing with the RFCC. Yes, the Great Emerald. And that's why there were TVs everywhere in the game. Another thing, it's explaining what the thing in the game, reality, fiction, reason, world. And then also he genetically engineered a clone of Sonic or something? Yes. I don't know.
The idea was it was an NAG clone. Not the only time a clone of Sonic would appear. It was an NAG clone of Sonic.
Back.
That one didn't.
I know it seemed like it was ripe for returning at any point.
Didn't it come back kind of with the Metamorpho?
Well, they did an evil twin Metamorpho, yeah. They did an evil twin story, but I mean, Sonic, the extra life, like that entity, because all he did with it was boot it into space, put it back in the TV and boot it into space. It was ripe for return. It'd crash off a passing spaceship and fall back to the planet.
Didn't even need to do that. He should have just appeared in a strange Arabian-style country.
Oh, God.
Snake men would look after it. Right up to the point where a yellow double would turn. Anyhow, right, we're getting way ahead of ourselves here.
Yeah, we're all over the place here.
This is the problem with talking about something like this. It's just so bloody big. Myself, I first came across this with basically a double punch. I found the first issue in my local spa way back when, and I also found the annual.
Ooh. Oh, the yearbooks, yeah.
Yeah. The very first Sonic the Hedgehog yearbook, which was a very strange precursor to this.
Oh, good God, it was.
There were elements of the Stay Sonic thing in there, but there was also elements of what can only be described as Disney and Mickey Mouse.
More Archie, really. Just as the kind of weird, funny animal stuff. But
Mhm.
actually, no, you're right, because I've got it here in front of me. Yeah, Robotnik painting tunnels on walls. Wile E.
Yeah.
Coyote Roadrunner stuff.
Yeah, really odd stuff. It's still really enjoyable, and for the time, the artwork was really quite nice for
Oh, yeah, I
something.
mean, that's Elson again, you know. So
Yeah,
it's great.
very, very early Elson, so to speak. Elson had been around for quite some time. Now, there are two names you're going to hear a lot of throughout this, dear listener. You're going to hear a lot of Richard Elson and Nigel Kitchen, because these two were instrumental in not only making me love this, but into world building, which is something I've always loved. I love world building, and they do it in droves. There's actually a quote I've got here by Lou Stringer. It's the majority of readers were aged between 5 and 10, and many strips were written with this in mind. Lou Stringer was quoted as saying, "This doesn't mean that older readers can't appreciate the stories and artwork, of course, but it's worth bearing in mind that if the stories sometimes seem juvenile, it's because they are. Having said that, it doesn't mean we can be sloppy just because we're just writing for kids."
Yeah.
And I think that really does sum up Sonic the Comic massively. At no point did it really try to talk down to you. There are a few storylines where you sort of sitting there going, hang on a second, what? The one that springs to mind is Amy getting Sonic's powers and then Robotnik getting them off Amy and then Sonic having to deal with that. Yeah.
I feel like you've kludged a couple of stories together there.
There's the story of how Amy became pink.
Yeah.
And then straight after that one, there was Robotnik stealing Sonic's powers and becoming blue and running around.
Oh, man, no, those things are like 5 years apart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The origin of Sonic actually happens in issue 8. It's that
Oh,
early.
no, how Amy
No.
became pink.
Amy became
Amy
pink. That
became
was after I stopped buying the comic. That was into the hundreds. And the Robotnik stealing the powers and becoming blue, that's like issue 30 thereabouts. It's 30, 40 thereabouts.
Hasn't been that long since I've reread these, and I've combined them into... Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to argue with you.
Well,
Never going to argue with you on this one.
all I can just simply remember is that the Amy story was after I stopped buying the comic, and the Robotnik steals Sonic's powers one was quite early.
Fair
When I was still buying it.
All right, I'm not going to disagree with you at all. But what I will ask is a question. I'm going to ask you a very simple question, Mr. McFeely.
No, I hate simple questions. They scare me.
It's a simple question, but it's probably going to be a complex answer. I want to know what part of Sonic the Comic, what collection of issues is the one that makes it for you, the one that sticks with you no matter what.
Well, I actually stopped getting the comic after a couple of years because I entered that dodgy phase where I decided I was too old for this shit.
I never hit that with Sonic the Comic.
No, I was getting... Who remembers Judge Dredd, Lawman of the Future?
Yep.
Yes.
Yeah. So I decided, I only have so much money. It's got to come down to between one of these two. Dredd skewed a tiny bit older. It was new. It was fresh. I really enjoyed their take on Judge Death. And I said, I knew it fresh. It's not like I really knew what Judge Dredd was about at the time. This was my introduction to a lot of it. I never even saw the film. I just bought the comic because I recognized like some of the names and things from Sonic the Comic, and it was the same sort of general layout and approach. And I thought, well, I've been getting Sonic for long enough now. Oh, the next issue's got a Shining Force strip in it. Right, I'll go for Dredd. So I remember it was at the end of the Return of Chaotic storyline with the Brotherhood of Metallics making their big play. The end of the Brotherhood of Metallics. Yeah. So anything after that, I have since gone on to read years ago. I went on to read. So out of those original, I think it's about 60 issues there, about 60, 70 issues. It's one of two. It's either the Sonic Terminator, which is the Sonic CD adaptation that ran in the mid-20s.
Mm-hmm.
I'm here. The audio's way in.
Sorry, I was just waiting for it to come back.
Yeah. What did you hear me say? The numbers? What did I say?
You got as far as mid-20s.
Oh, cool. That's where I left off. And that was the adaptation, and that was the first 5-parter in the
Yes.
comic. And that was, sudden. The funny thing about the Sonic Terminator is it's marked as a 5-parter, but really it's a 2-part story and then a 3-parter that's got nothing to do with those first 2 parts.
Yes.
But it was still labeled as this 5-parter that they'd also been building up to over the last couple of months, because it wasn't like they suddenly said, right, time for the Sonic CD adaptation. We'll introduce Amy Rose in the first couple of pages, and away we go. No, Amy had been introduced a couple of months beforehand in a story that was actually dedicated to introducing her as a character, first of all. And in fact, it was called Girl Trouble. It was a 2-parter. And in fact, that story was really important in that it established a lot of the stuff that had only kind of been laid down vaguely up until this point regarding freedom fighters and the Kindabor computer, and it gave Johnny Lightfoot and Porker Lewis their makeovers and everything. That was probably the last big step in establishing the status quo of Sonic the Comic.
Yeah.
Like we said, there was the origin story followed by a brief time travel story that established Robotnik taking over the planet. But then we had Girl Trouble, which cemented a lot of this stuff that had only been kind of sketched in up until that point, and it also gave Robotnik his makeover to the Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon version for whatever reason. One thing, here we are now, 20 years later, I still have no idea why they had to do that.
It was just marketing, wasn't it? It was just so Robotnik looked like the Robotnik on TV. But gradually over time, he became less and less that, and more the Robotnik that I cherish to my heart. The grotesque monstrosity that is Dr. Robotnik.
Yeah, he does live somewhere between 2 designs at the very end.
Oh, the very end.
He's make him look like the adventure versions, short of giving him a new coat.
Yeah.
I like the fact, though, that at one point they actually dedicated a storyline, a plot point to him basically turning himself into an egg, then rehatching himself away from the Sonic 1 persona to the Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine incarnation.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. The Adventures of Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon. That's Girl Trouble. That happened in this Girl Trouble story.
Yeah, that's the one.
Yeah, so that's kind of that through to the end of the Sonic Terminator are kind of like one big 8-part story, really, because you get the introduction of the Captain Plunder and the Mystic Cave Pirates in between the two as well. Love Captain Plunder to death and back. Probably the single best original character out of the whole Sonic. No, that's a lie. Short fuse. He's up there though. He's in the top 5, maybe even the top 3. So the Sonic Terminator.
What about the cat?
Ebony.
Are you telling me that the wonderful cat character that becomes part of Captain Plunder's crew is not one of the greatest characters?
Hey, Simpson is awesome.
He unlocks a locked door with a question mark from above his head.
He was actually fantastic. I loved him too. But I'm kind of cutting Captain Plunder and his pirates as one.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the Sonic Terminator was 5 parts. It was a summer. It was a summer holidays. And you would wait eagerly. I quite vividly remember eagerly awaiting the final part of the Sonic Terminator, and sitting then on the real, I might have run off to play stickball afterwards. Sitting on my front step in the nice warm summer sun and reading the final part of the Sonic Terminator. That was a good summer. What was that? I guess that'd be the summer of '94.
Yeah. Yeah.
It sounds about right.
Jesus.
Yeah, tell me about it. And then the other big one was probably their Sonic and Knuckles adaptation.
Yes.
Yes, which
yes.
What was that now? Let's see. Hang on, I'm going to remember the titles. Pirates of the Sandopolis, Tomb of the Sandopolis, something. Oh, I can't remember the title, but that was it was like, what was it about? It was a 7-parter as well, I think, but it was a 2-parter, a 2-parter, and a 3-parter.
Yeah.
Where they kind of jumped past the first bit of the Sonic and Knuckles game and started things off in the Sandopolis zone. Raiders of the Sandopolis zone?
No. There was the entire sequence of Sonic arriving on Floating Island, on Angel Island, and you got the thing of, it's a good thing I had my force field. You have a force field?
That's Sonic, and that's the Sonic 3 adaptation.
Yes.
Yeah. Then it was a couple of months later before they got around to Sonic and Knuckles.
I was convinced that there was just a couple of issues.
No,
Between
Sonic,
that finishing
Sonic
and
the
sort of
Sonic
starting up.
3 one ran across the early 30s,
Yeah.
and that was 3 two-parters. Then it was the early 40s before they did the Sonic and Knuckles, because it ran up to issue 50.
I really wish I hadn't collected all these now.
So, I mean, technically, it wasn't much more than, say, half a dozen issues in between, but when you're a kid, that's 3 months. That's
Yeah.
ever, like, you know. That got you through Christmas, because there was that Ice Cap Christmas two-parter in between the two as well, which kind of pulled on the Sonic and Knuckles threads a little bit, because it was a zone from the and that was a big one as well, you know. That was about the Death Egg launching again. They built up to that for a while. They had a prologue there where we had this computer simulation of the Death Egg being reactivated and everybody dying. And it was, of course, one of the massively huge things that happened in it, and this is something we just mentioned a little while ago there as well, was Sonic the Hedgehog. Sonic the Comics version of Super Sonic was big bad news. He was Sonic's Mr. Hyde. And he appeared once in issue 8. He was only in Sonic was done in 7-page stories, so he was on like 3 pages out of the 7 pages. Mm-hmm. Then I think it was issue 20, issue 19 he reappeared in the Hilltop Zone. And then you know, that was 30 issues then before he appeared again in this Sonic and Knuckles adaptation. And again, when you're a kid, was it 30 issues? That's over a year. That is forever.
Yeah.
When you're a kid. So whenever Super Sonic appeared again, you knew shit was on. Mm-hmm. And it was with me, because I had been dragged off on a very boring weekend away with my family the week that issue 50 came out. So this was my solace. Super Sonic! And that was issue 50, and that was, and then that was only the countdown to Doomsday two-parter. Like, that then led into the 3-part Doomsday storyline where the Death Egg was reactivated, and that was like where they got the floating island moving again and activated all its ancient defenses, and there was an aerial battle with the Death Egg, and then Robotnik came at you with the final boss from the game, and you know, that was some.
What always sticks in my mind is that splash page of Sonic at the front, the thousands of egg robos behind him.
Oh, yes.
The Death Egg in the, I want to say the far distance, but the thing's freaking huge.
Yeah.
And underneath him, floating island turning around. And it was to be continued. No! No, it's not!
No, I can't have 2 weeks! No!
The fucking island is turning around and has a big lasery thing coming out of its cannon.
Oh, and of course, what did I forget as well? The return of Metallics happened in that storyline as well. I mean, that had everything going on. That was pulling on all of the great moments in Sonic the Comics past. And that in turn then proceeded to lead into the adaptation of Chaotix and the Brotherhood of Metallic's Return of Chaotix storyline, which was still one of the great high points of the comics run. But for me, it's between those two, and I kind of lean towards the Sonic Terminator of sheer nostalgia.
The interesting thing about the Sonic Terminator is it does something, and I didn't realize it did it until I went back to read it. In those issues, you have the Sonic Terminator, we'll say the 5-parter.
Yeah.
Okay? Throughout all of those issues, there is also the backup strip, Sonic's World, where Kinterbor, the Kinterbor computer, tells you little bits and things and stuff, and lays down some very interesting things which they never got round to doing. I don't know if it was because of time, or they realised that having flowers as characters would be odd, or I don't know what the reasons were, but there was lots of interesting little tidbits came out of Sonic's World. And without that as a backup strip, Sonic Terminator, it wouldn't have been any worse for it, but it enriched it so much.
I don't remember a lot of backup strips that. Well, they laid down the stuff about the Miracle Planet, didn't they, and where that came from. Yeah, that was important, wasn't it? And there's a passing mention to the Time Stones that just wound up having nothing to do with the story itself. Yeah. Even though one of the stones appeared in it. But.
Well, not that stone. The Time Stones didn't have anything to do with that storyline. Then there's the Porker Lewis trapped.
Yeah, that wasn't Time Stones.
No, but the Time Stones allowed the Miracle Planet to move through dimensions and times.
Well, we never really found out what the Time Stones were. Remember, Sonic uses a Time Stone to travel back in time in the Sonic Terminator. They never actually came up again, you know.
No. But Sonic's World gave you all that bit of information. Yeah. And then much later on, the Porker Lewis storyline, you got
the fact that the planet disappears. Yeah. I mean, that was. But that came in at the end of the Sonic Terminator as well, when Amy and Sonic were stuck on the planet for a month after it disappeared.
Who got the worst thing of that? Anyway, what were you saying there, Mr. Matzo?
I was just going to say, when you and me were talking about that particular storyline, you actually got me to read the Sonic's World first before I got into the... Well, it wasn't a trade, it was a collector's edition that had Girl Trouble and Sonic the Terminator in it.
What about made collector's editions?
Yeah, and I had to reread all of that bit so that I could understand the whole concept of the Miracle World.
Miracle Planet.
Yeah, the Miracle Planet. So
It's called the Miracle Planet, not the little planet, Sega. It's the Miracle Planet. Shut up.
It's not Metal Sonic, it's Metallics.
That one is okay because he was Metallics the Metal Sonic. That one I let go.
Metallics is the name of the species, for want of a better term.
Mm.
But still, every time he turns up, you're not a Metal Sonic, you are Metallics.
Yeah.
And less said about Mecha Sonic, the better. Anyhow.
I don't even know which one Mecha Sonic is.
It's the one from Sonic and Knuckles in the Archie comic.
Yeah, who was turned into a Metal Sonic for the Metallics for the UK. Yeah.
Yeah.
There were so many Robot Sonics, they just gave up in Sonic the comic, and it was like they're all Metallics.
Was there a precursor to Metallics earlier on in Sonic the comic, where basically it was just standard badnik,
indeed.
which
Yeah,
then
that
used
was like,
Sonic
what,
as a battery.
Issue 4 or something, wasn't
Yeah.
Yeah.
it? 4. I was actually reading it at the time, but I remember the story.
Yeah. Oh, that was such a cool design. And for some reason, Robotnik was dressed up like a ringmaster.
Yes. What?
I don't know, but I always liked it.
He needs a top hat and a monocle.
Well, he did whenever he looked like that. He had no height to his head.
Mm.
Is that why he went in the egg? Just to get some extra height?
Perhaps.
I
never understood that egg thing either. I mean, it worked within the confines of the story, but it was like, how did it? What?
I urge you to look at the Mean Bean Machine version of Robotnik and then watch the movie Coneheads.
Yes.
It will change your perceptions. Trust me on that.
It will. Everyone in Coneheads becomes a lot more sinister now.
You're welcome.
Mr. Matt,
Yes.
I want to know a storyline that you enjoy.
Well, the storyline I enjoyed, I wouldn't say I enjoyed it, but it made me think. No. It made me think, and I've got a funny feeling you're going to bring this up later, so I'm actually just going to bring it up now because I'm a geek.
You're absolutely right. The Mariaxo brothers are one of the most wondrous creations.
Shut up! They're awful. The
Marxio brothers.
The Marxio brothers for starters. Bloody.
You send us back to Mariaxo.
But it was the Mario brothers. So it was a chance for the comics to lampoon Nintendo, but the cross with the Marx brothers.
The free electricians that
from Super Marxio
world. Oh my lord.
Grouchio, Cheekio, and Harpio.
Oh, God.
Fantastic. That was really the comic's first labeled two-parter, wasn't it?
Yes.
I mean, there were stories that had fed into one another. What was it called? Casino Nights or something like that?
Casino Night Peril, I think it was.
Something like that.
Memory serves me right.
That was the late teens, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Spawned out of a blinking dig at the writers at Nintendo.
But they kept coming back, though.
Yeah.
Yes.
They were wonderful.
They were fantastic. Hey, that crazy hedge of a hog, he's always mad about something.
But
There's an entire storyline where they try to buy up the I'm trying to think of the names.
Carnival Night on the floating island, yeah.
They keep trying to give Knuckles jobs and try to kill him. It's wonderful.
And then it ends when Knuckles punches the zone off the island. How awesome is that?
Derailed! Derailed by the fucking Marxio brothers.
Shout it down, more like. Marxio brothers is awesome.
But no, in all seriousness, the main storyline that got me thinking was something that was simple. Something that was truly and utterly simple. And that was Johnny Lightfoot's death.
At the very end of the comic.
Yeah, the adoption of Sonic Adventure.
Because you did not expect that. You seriously did not expect that. Number one, yeah, what you could read that at any age, but it was targeted for pre-teens. And number two, you didn't, even though it wasn't a character that appeared in the games, it was still a loved character because that was pretty much Sonic's confidant. You know, he hit many an occasion. You had Johnny Lightfoot over people like Tails.
Yeah.
In those stories. So
Johnny was basically the only killable character.
Well, it was either him or the pig, to be honest.
There was never going to. Porker had left the series by that stage. Well, I mean, he was obviously still floating around and helping out in the tech end of things, but he wasn't, you know.
He wasn't a fighter anymore.
He had retired from the Freedom Fighters, and obviously they were never going to kill any of the actual bankable game characters. So Johnny was the obvious kill, but it didn't make it any less shocking.
No, and what made it more and more shocking is the fact that it was played out as well. It's the fact that Sonic comes up to him and he's like, "Oh, come on, quit digging around, it's not enough of this." And it's like the realization sinking in, and you actually feel for Sonic because then all this lighter than light, all this levity just disappears from him, and that was an impact.
I always remember the very last issue. You've got them all standing, staring out, just slightly above the reader, so to speak, with that picture of Johnny in the background in the clouds. Yeah. And that hit home. That really hit home. At the end of the day, this is a Sonic the Hedgehog comic about some funny animals, but the entirety of the Sonic Adventure adaptation is just it. There are parts of that thing which hurt.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
There's parts in that comic that I think that the cartoon series that came about tried to do, and in most cases did well. But this comic really did shout out, these are freedom fighters. There is actual danger here. Mm-hmm. There's things that you cannot come back from.
Well, you look at the Robotnik's entire plan towards the end of the adventure, the Sonic Adventure. I'm trying to think what the umbrella title for those stories was.
There wasn't one really. It wasn't a multi-part story. It just had titles. Just call it Sonic Adventure.
Yeah. But Robotnik's plan towards that entire thing was, well, time to just sit back and watch everybody die.
Yeah, me too, me included.
Yeah. Just everything's gonna die. Yeah, fuck it. Just kill everything. Go on, you big watery git.
Well, he'd been God a couple of times by that stage. It was wearing on him.
Yeah. I think he'd actually been dead once as well.
Depends on your definition of dead, I think. But yeah, my recall, as you will note as we go along here, is not nearly so good for stuff that came after I stopped buying the comic.
Yeah, well, obviously not.
Even though I have read it all, but my recall of the Return of Chaotix is.
Yeah. It's a shame you missed out on some really good stuff.
Oh, I would always look at it in the store, and I know my brother got a couple of issues, and I kept quite abreast of what was happening when he was trapped in the special zone leading up to issue 100. Mm-hmm. It was after that I kind of sort of lost the attention.
It was about that time that, if memory serves me right, 2000. No, so the Judge Dredd magazine started coming out as well.
Oh, well, okay. Well, that's what pulled you away, wasn't it?
It didn't pull me away, but what the hell is this? Hang on. Over here we've got nice, colourful blue hedgehog, and over here there is filth. Utter goddamn filth.
With me, it was more the case of I still had things like Overkill coming out at that point, and Overkill to me was a much more invested comic, if you know what I mean, with all the stuff going down in that. And I was still very much a 2000 AD whore at that point, because I was still buying 2000 AD from the age of about 7. So I was still very much buying those comics in those days. So other things, unfortunately, took precedence. So Sonic got shunted to the back thing. Like I said, I was reading the comics off my friend Craig. Whenever he brought them into college, I would read them. But buying them myself never really transpired past the first 10 issues.
It's a shame.
I know.
Such
a damn shame.
I'm actually going to pick for my favourite storyline something which I don't think anyone's going to be expecting.
Ooh.
And that is the Nigel Dobbin Knuckles series.
I thought you were gonna go with the Shinobi series in the back issue, but
we'll talk to them. We'll talk about them in a moment. Don't worry.
Now, Kitching wrote the Nigel Dobbin Knuckles, didn't he?
Yes, it's how I differentiate them.
Because I figured.
The feel of the Knuckles series when Dobbin was drawing them is so different to the Elson drawn main strip. Especially even when Knuckles turns up in the main strip, he feels not like a different character, but there's a different aspect to him in the Elson series than there is in the Dobbin series. And the Dobbin series gave me two things which I adore. I absolutely adore. It gave me giant undead spirit of dinosaurs.
Everybody love dinosaurs.
Love them. And it gave me Dr. Zachary.
Dr. freaking Zachary!
I love Zachary like you wouldn't believe.
I adore Zachary, but he was representative of one of my big, long-standing beefs with the comic, which was its refusal to explain whatever happened to the Echidnas.
Yeah, well, that's true. Oh no, it kind of did that in the Sonic Adventure adaptation.
Actually, just slightly diverting away, there was actually some things that weren't really explained. There were things alluded to and just never picked up upon, like just going back to what me and Adam were talking about before the podcast. Adam brought up the fact that there was a little thing about the things that were alive in the Miracle World, which just didn't get.
I don't remember that.
It's in Sonic's World. They mentioned that the flowers. They basically allude to the idea that the flowers are sentient.
So when in Sonic CD, when you defeat a bad guy or a badnik, they turn into flowers.
Yeah, right. Well, that's what they were doing then, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah. I think that it was going to go somewhere, but they never got to it, or they never did whatever they wanted to do. I'm not entirely sure, but. It was just it's one of those things that I always remember sticking out like a sore thumb. It's like, what is this? Why do you do it? What?
Yeah.
Especially the third time or the second time they go to Miracle Planet, it's like the flowers. What about the flowers?
Wouldn't it be amazing if you had a second story set on that planet and something happened to cause them to turn against organics? So you had man-eating plants.
Mammalian.
Yeah.
Mammalian.
Exactly.
Miracle Planet just turns up and there's just this giant cannon sticking out towards Mobius, saying, "Animals go home."
Yeah, if anyone takes that idea, I want royalties.
I can picture this in my head, but I can't find it now that I have the comic open in front of me.
It's basically, there's a single panel, and it's got Kintabor narrating through it. And you see it's basically a panel of the forest. That's about it. And it's saying...
And I remember it's next to the panel where Robotnik's got his big hands around the time stones as well.
Yeah.
But why can't I find... Oh, there we go. Sorry, that's right. There was like a prologue issue or something of Sonic's World, wasn't there, as well as part 1 and 2? Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
That's right. Here, yeah. Okay, I got it. Apparently, I've got to leave room for some surprises, haven't I? That was the height of it, yeah.
Yeah, that's it. It's one of those things. It's like, hang on a second.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I'm with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I completely derailed myself now.
Yeah, sorry, that was my bad.
Yeah, I was talking about Knuckles. I think at this point, it's worth just mentioning that there wasn't just the very serious, very sensible, very grimdark storylines that kept appearing in this series. I mean, there was lots of high adventure as well, as we mentioned before. There was the wonderful Sonic and Knuckles adaptation, which ends with, well, it doesn't end, but one of the issues ends with, has to be described as one of the biggest fuck yeah moments in the entire series. But there was also the really odd stuff. Do you remember when the entirety of Mobius had no electricity?
Wait, when?
After Robotnik was defeated.
Oh yeah, right, back issue 100, yeah, whenever the electromagnetic pulse, yeah.
Yeah. The backup strips had some of the weirdest ideas I think I've ever seen in any British comic. They range from the not so weird, the fantastic steam-powered dinosaur dragon thing.
Hey, that's cool.
Oh yeah. To just pulling out. Every creator was apparently given a bit of a chance to say, well, if you wanted to create a villain, who would it be?
Yeah.
And they went to town. For the entire maybe year or so that Robotnik was completely off the grid, they went to town. They
I don't think
created.
it went on for very long because they did Sonic 3D not long afterwards. But I know what you mean.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not talking years in real time. It's year as in
Yeah, okay, right.
comic time.
They meant real time.
No, in comic time. Because I think they kind of mentioned that they always give you a little thing of like 6 months after Robotnik,
Yeah.
8 months after Robotnik, and it was 1 year after Robotnik where they started Flicky's Island storyline. But yeah, that sort of period of time, they threw so many truly bizarre yet brilliant villains at you. It just didn't stop. The one that sticks in my mind is the mole who was the weather wizard.
Wendy Wallace.
That's the one. It's just for some reason he sticks in my mind.
It was a she.
Was it she?
Yeah, Wendy Wallace. She was a weather woman who went evil, I think, and started controlling the weather, something like that.
See what I mean?
The one I remember is I have no recollection of why it happened, but vegetables started to come to life, and their evil ruler was King Edward the Potato.
Yes.
You know, that actually is probably the single standout weirdest thing that ever happened in a Sonic the Hedgehog story in Sonic the Comic.
Yeah, there are some other weirder things.
And these were the work of one man, mostly one man.
The fabled Lou Stringer.
The other one of the big two, essentially, of the writers on the book.
Mm-hmm. Lou Stringer was given quite a lot of interesting storyline, shall we say? None of them, I wouldn't say any of them were really bad.
No.
Yeah, but
they get weird. But...
Yeah, some of them you just sort of read it and you hang on. I mean, the one that sticks in my mind is just a giraffe in a business suit talking to an elephant. And yeah, within the confines of the comic, that shouldn't be weird.
No.
But for some reason, it just seemed odd.
Like Metamorphia was one of his. He and
Yeah.
Kitching alternated early on, and there were these other writers who would come and go. But basically, as the book went on, I think I don't have any evidence for this because I don't have like tables in front of me or anything. But I think it was basically either Kitching or Stringer would be writing the lead Sonic strip.
Yeah.
Yeah. And Stringer did most of the Trapped in the Special Zone stories, didn't he? Whenever he was fighting all of the parodies of Marvel Comics that was in there. And then Kitching did the big 100. Kitching would do the big sweeping epics, essentially, the video game adaptations. And then Kitching was off the comic for quite an extended period of time in the last act of its life, you know. And Stringer did a lot of stories where, this is when my recall gets bad, but it's like Robotnik has seized control of the power of the Chaos Emeralds and is...
the living god.
Really warping reality. I think this is the second time he does this as well. He does it a couple of times. And you know, reality is really getting warped. And by the time it's all settled, Earth and Mobius have become slightly fused, and Sonic and Amy go on a lot of. It's not even Sonic until Sonic and Amy go on a lot of random one-episode journeys to other worlds, zones, and planets. Mm-hmm. Which is what Stringer mostly wrote the Amy backup strips. Not backup strips. They weren't backup strips. They were just strips. The Amy in strips, and she teamed up with Techno, and they did a thing where they were traveling all across dimensions and planets using a thing called the Eternity Ring for a while. And I think the editor liked that a lot, so he basically took Stringer and put him on the main strip and did that. And Kitching was off the thing for a long time after that. Mm-hmm. And that was probably the low point of the comic, honestly, because it was just these weird one-shot adventure things. Yeah. But Stringer did bring a conclusion to all of that. What was it called? Endgame, Game Over, something like that. Endgame. When Robotnik forces the planet into ecological collapse. Yeah. And then Stringer came back to do the chaos storyline to end the comic. But Stringer, you know, for anybody who may be randomly listening to this who's not a Sonic the Comic fan, but one of the more common Transformers fans in the listening audience, Lou Stringer, Combat Colin, folks. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Who recently appeared in something else I was reading recently. What was I reading with Combat Colin appeared?
I don't know what it was, yeah.
Oh, God, what was it? Something recent. Anyhow, completely off topic. What I was going to do next was bring up the more original characters that Sonic the Comic brought up. You know, we've already mentioned Captain Plunder and the Sky Pirates, which excuse me for this noise.
I did.
The Pirates of the Sky. But they didn't stop there. They also created such wonderful characters as Techno
Yeah.
and Short Fuse the Cybernick.
Well, Techno always seemed to me she was just the necessary stand-in for Porker after Porker actually was allowed to have a plot.
But she came into her own. She seriously came into her own. Her and
She
Amy
did.
had some wonderful adventures.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, we talk about original characters. STC's version of Amy is basically an original character.
Yeah, that's a very good point.
Yeah.
It is so far removed from the... well, not to start with. To start with, it is the lovesick, slightly stalkerish, crazed woman who needs to really be put away for her own safety.
But I love what they did with that. Like her original appearance, it wasn't just a goofy kids cartoon version of a girl likes our hero. Oh, girls are icky. It's a hilarious story where Sonic has to duck the affections of a girl. This is a world where Sonic is an outlaw and the evil forces rule the planet. So she's arrested for fraternizing with a terrorist because she goes around claiming she's Sonic's girlfriend, even though Sonic's never met her before in her life. Yeah, it's like it takes the idea from the games manuals and everything where she thinks she's Sonic's girlfriend and puts it into the world of Sonic the comic and puts that great spin on it. Then Sonic has to rescue her. But they got her out of her game design outfit as quickly as they could, and they put her in like a rotating succession of trousers and T-shirts and gave her a weapon and made her a competent fighter. And she you never quite knew what was going on in her head when it came to Sonic. But the further on you got, you were never sure if she really liked him or she was just doing it to mess with him.
There's I'm just reading up on this. The original intention from the writers was basically to give her a bit of sass, make her one of those sort of female characters that the male main character sort of like bickered with, you know, like Sybil Shepherd and Bruce Willis in Moonlighting, or what's another one? You know, any of those sort of buddy movies where it was a man and a woman.
1950s screwball dame type affairs.
Yeah, basically stuff like that. Now, I'm trying to remember who... There was a particular person, it was a lady, and she had some influence over the comic, and I'm trying to find her name. But
I don't remember the name of the editor,
Yeah, she suggested and said that wasn't really going to fly, because you want like a character so that the girls could be able to look up to her, and that's where the tweaking of Amy's character came into play. So
now that came at an unfortunate time, though, because that was right at the height of girl power.
Yeah.
And Amy did kind of skirt the edges of that, and she dipped into it occasionally. Altogether, like, generally, they managed to not get to, like, succumb to that too badly. It came at a wonky time, though, when I never quite dug the checkered slacks.
Still can't find this woman's name. It was on here when I was reading it, and I can't find it now.
What I find quite interesting is you mentioned Amy being arrested for it. Just as I was mentioning the sort of brand new additions that Sonic the Comic did to the universe. And she was arrested by one of the finest editions.
Oh, true.
The Troopers. I love the Troopers so very, very much.
It's like this collection of wonderfully put upon guys who you think that would be generic thugs, but they're not. They're just these really put upon work a day, not jobs worth. Stop him. I don't want to stop him. You stop him. It's not worth me job.
Seemed to be partially modelled on the Crimson Guard and the old Action Force comics. Not before the G.I. Joe thing, the actual Action Force comics where everyone was red.
Yeah, entirely possible.
Just to jump back a second there, Deborah Tate was the editor, I think.
Thank you. That's the one. Yeah, the writers wanted to go a different way. She said, no, putting the kibosh on that. I wanted to be somebody that the girl readership can look upon.
Not a bad goal to have, to be fair.
No, definitely not.
And, it turned her into a character who was deserving of her own strips and who carried her weight.
Also, just I'm actually going through issue 100 as we're speaking, and it's literally every strip is just a chapter in the story, but each one is that strip. So you got Dr. Robotnik, Knuckles, Sonic, Sonic's World, and Amy.
Yeah. actually, to completely bypass what I was saying before, the stuff that came from 100 is something I wanted to bring up.
I think, to be honest, 100 was probably where the book peaked altogether.
Yeah, you're probably right. I think, and it never really caught those heights again till the very end.
Yeah.
But there is something around the 100 which I always found quite interesting. Right? And that is the fact that Robotnik, not in issue 100, but in that big old storyline, Robotnik builds a giant computer.
Oh, yes.
That computer has everybody thrown in it. And they are all used as organic batteries. Is this sounding familiar?
Yeah.
The Matrix.
I just want to point out to everybody at the time who, when the Matrix came out, said, oh, how original is this idea? No, it's not. Sonic the Comic did it first. Anyway, moving on.
Did they do it first?
Yes.
Yeah.
99 was the Matrix.
When was issue 100?
96? 97?
Oh, fair enough, so.
I just wanted to point that out because it's something that's always been a bugbear of mine. Fucking Matrix.
97, yeah. Here
Well, Matrix has never been originally emitted as much that they took elements from Ghost in the Shell anyways. But that's a whole different
Yeah, I am not going to get into this conversation because I'll be here for hours just ranting, raving, and spitting.
So the original characters from Sonic the Comic leap back through the flaming hoops we took to get here.
So yeah, Short Fuse the Cybernik, I think, is one of the
Short Fuse.
Outside of the Porker Lewis and Johnny Lightfoot,
Porker and Johnny,
regular characters.
Porker and Johnny were characters that were adapted from the little video game sprites that you would free from the Badniks.
Yeah.
They were the Pig and Rabbit, and they were created apparently by Sega of America as part of this backstory. They got fleshed out a little in Stay Sonic, and so Sonic the Comic proceeded to use them, and they give them a bit of a makeover to match the designs of a Sonic cartoon that ultimately never happened, and they I mean again like all the other things I was talking about from Stay Sonic, these were characters who came to be primarily associated with Sonic the Comic for what it did with them, even though they didn't actually originate with.
No. But we had such amazing characters like Short Fuse turn up. Short Fuse the Cybernik is a brilliant, brilliant addition. I realize that I'm just good about a lot of these things, but it's not for any small reason. Characters like Short Fuse fleshed out the world brilliantly. It gave you a completely new point of view of Sonic's world and the war with Robotnik. Because at this point, it was a bloody war. It was a full-blown guerrilla war going on. And if you don't agree with me, I draw your attention to anything that involves Bob Beakley and his traveling circus.
Love Bob Beakley.
Which is another brand new character, Megatox.
Oh, Mr. Tox, Michael Tox. What was his name again?
I can't remember his name originally, but he was just Megatox.
No, the gag was that Sonic could never remember his name anytime he met him afterwards.
But he's a creation that can kill you just by being near you. It's one of the things that Sonic the Comic did. They kind of took a lot of ideas from other comics, shall we say.
Yeah.
But then really twisted them around to make them fit into Sonic's world. Megatox, for all talent purposes, is Metallo. Yeah, the premise is he is Metallo.
Well, Mega Mac was the purple water from the chemical plant zone. And again, that was something, I mean, I don't know who came up with that one, but that was in Stay Sonic as well, was that the purple goo was Mega Mac. And they worked on it from there. Yeah, they did Dr. Robotnik experiments upon hapless victim.
There was quite a lot of them over the years.
Yeah.
But, is there any other characters apart from Short Fuse that jump out at you, Mr. McFeely?
Short Fuse was the best.
Apart from Short Fuse.
Robot. I mean, let's just tell the people at home what Short Fuse was about. He was a squirrel who was captured and was going to be part of the first of the next generation of Badniks, Super Badniks. But he managed to overcome his programming, and he became like a Badnik who fought for good. And later on, they I think Techno, wasn't it? Maybe no, it was when was it? I don't even remember. I think it was the first time Robotnik became God. Or was it the second? Anyway, feedback from the Chaos Emeralds freed him of his armor at last, but then they changed it up so that he could put it on to fight crime. Shorty the Squirrel became Short Fuse the Cybernetic. He was great. Let's see, original characters. Well, I always liked Metamorphia. Even though she had only like sparse appearances, because it's like shape changers. I had a big thing about shape changers back then when I was wee. I always enjoyed shape changers. Captain Plunder, of course. Techno never really sang for me. I don't know why. I didn't like her, but she always was just girl Porker Lewis to me, you know.
Are you saying the Canary never sang for you?
Oh, I didn't mean it like that. But gosh, who else was there? I was like Nutzan Bolt from the Tales story.
Yeah.
It was like he was a robot who wore the little severed heads of other robots around his neck. And they could still chat at him and everything.
Well, this is an interesting thing. The Tales storylines always went a little odd. The Zone Runner stuff was my favourite.
The Zone Runner stuff seemed like the most. It was funny. It wasn't the better stuff. I think it was Stringer did it, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But it was the one that seemed like it fitted a little better into the world, where instead of like the Kitching written Tales strips, because Tales got his own strip, but in the late teens as well, and it was a big thing. Hey, Tales is getting his own strip. I think that was the comic's first
deviation away.
To giving one of the other, because we didn't say this is like 4 strips, 7-page Sonic strip, 5-page strips. Up until Tails got his own strip, they were all based on other Sega video games, as we said. Tails got his own strip. This was like, hey, Sonic's world is expanding. We're giving more of its characters. They would give Knuckles his own strip a little later. Knuckles and Tails had a bit of a team up. Amy got her own strip, Sonic's world, and then it just took over the comic eventually. And in Tails' strips, it turned out he came from another dimension called the Nameless Zone, and he'd been sending letters home claiming that he was the hero of Mobius. And whenever they had need of a hero, like the elders of his dimension called him back home, and it was like, ooh, mummy, I have messed up ever so slightly here. But they would give him magic armor and a little sword, and he would go and fight goblins. And
He went to fight Trog.
Trog
was brilliant.
John the King. Trog was another good one, all right, even though he was very one-note, but he had the good tragic backstory to him. I'm trying to think of some of the others. I like the Blackthorns from the Tale strips.
Mm-hmm.
I can throw in a couple of characters.
Oh, go for it.
Grimer.
Oh, for fuck's
There
sake,
we
how
go.
could I not remember Grimer?
Grimer.
I was waiting for you to say that.
Myself. Where's that? Just commit harakiri right now. That was disgraceful.
If no other reason, I think the major reason to love Grimer is just one sequence from quite early on. It's the
I know the one you're talking about.
Robotnik standing there amidst the wreckage of his laboratory.
Fun, yep.
And he's just, get them! Somebody get them! They're getting... Oh. And he just cuts over to Grimer, and he's just there with a spanner. When I say to move, you will... Grimer, are you destroying the last trooper that could have captured them? Yes.
How did it go?
Oh, well, I suppose when you put it that way, I guess I got a little bit carried away.
Carried away. I'm
you need to be carried away.
That was Girl Trouble again. Girl Trouble was a good... And Girl Trouble introduced Grimer as well. Another big step in really cementing what would be the status quo of the thing going forward. Girl Trouble was massively significant, really, wasn't it? And it was just a big... It was kind of like it was kind of the prologue to the Sonic Terminator, but it was the last big step in getting all the pieces in play for what Sonic the Comic would be about for the next 10 years.
And I'm supposed the other character is a character I can't remember his bloody name too, but he was one of the natives, one of the animals. I was going to say he was one of the bad guys, and he was a war hog, and he's basically a big military man.
Oh,
I don't think
you're thinking of General Trusk.
That's it, yes. He only was one issue, wasn't he?
Yeah. But he was good.
Now, what was that in? When was that? Was that
Girl Trouble again?
Was it Girl Trouble again as well?
No. It wasn't Girl Trouble. It was the one with Captain Plunder. It was the in-betweeny one between Girl Trouble and Sonic the Terminator.
Pirates of the Mystic Cave.
That's the one. I like that whole scene. I wish there was a lot more done with him, and that's what's sad about it. I like this
See
idea.
a lot of natives actually on Robotnik's side. Actually, I've just gone through Pirates of the Mystic Cave. It's not Pirates of the Mystic Cave. When is it?
I don't know, but it's this whole scene where they're captured, and basically he's there. He's basically
here it is. Yeah,
away with the badness.
First part of the Sonic Terminator.
Yeah. I like the idea of this big military-minded bore of a character that's literally on Robotnik's side, and there isn't much done with him. You're quite right, but I like the idea behind it.
It's a recurrent theme. Yeah, what were they called? Drat, was it?
Oh yeah, the Dr. Robotnik Appreciation Tribe.
Yep, that's the one.
Was that before or after Robotnik had been deposed?
It was after.
Yeah.
Yeah, they started making appearances afterwards, but it gave you the idea that a lot of people sided with him.
There is no good. There's no side of good, no side of bad. You've got a middle in between as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, these are just the guys that live there. This is the interesting thing about Sonic's world. There is a lot of people who just live there. It's Sonic's. Sonic's doing the war against Robotnik. Occasionally, you just get little casualties from just people who are just there. By people, I mean squirrels and pigs and creatures of that ilk.
Yeah. There was a dog called Wuff as well.
I can't recall him offhand.
Yeah, there was a dog called Wuff who's sort of like... He's not a massive character, but I remember him vividly because he's the only dog. There's not that many dogs in the world of Mobius, so...
Well, before we move away from Sonic completely, because I am aware of the time a little bit here.
I don't even feel like we've scratched the surface.
No, we
here,
haven't.
Honestly,
we haven't.
We?
But we're nearly at an hour and a half already, so...
God.
Yeah. There is one thing I do want to talk about, finally. Actually, there's two things thinking about it. Bollocks. The first one is just how important the Metallic storylines were.
Oh, God, yeah.
Because
they were tent poles, basically.
Yeah. By the time they got round to finishing the Metallic storylines, some stuff had taken place which you just did not see coming. Such things as Polka Lewis suffering from huge amounts of anxiety from being trapped on the planet with a army of murderous killers.
Mm-hmm.
Nervous breakdown. That's what they actually called it. It was like, really? In a kid's comic? Okay.
Yeah. Ranging from that to right the way to Sonic has to create Robotnik.
Oh God, that was brilliant.
Oh, that was just something else.
That's the Return of Chaotic storyline, which I always thought that was a weird title. It kind of belied what it was actually about.
Well, I think it was kind of the idea, was it? You didn't know what it was about until the Metallics happened at you.
Yeah, I always felt like it was trying to promote the Chaotix a little more than it. I mean, it was the second thing they'd ever done, really, though, wasn't it? I mean, they'd been in the.
They've been in.
It was just called Chaotix, wasn't it? Yeah, the Knuckles Chaotix.
I'm just reading up. Virgin Books in the early 90s did a series of novels, and one of them was called Sonic the Hedgehog in the Fourth Dimension.
Yeah.
Which
is at the start.
Yeah, literally. I know I completely forgot. I apologise, but that is exactly the same thing. Sonic's time travelling back, and he's got to ensure that Kinterball becomes Robotnik.
In a slightly less direct fashion than he did in the comic, though, where he pulled the wire that tripped Kinterball. Because that was one of those things where it was like, Stay Sonic had it that you didn't really know why the ROCC malfunctioned. Kinterball might not have been paying attention, whatever, something might have happened. But in Sonic the comic, it took a more direct route where Kinterball tripped over a cable and fell on the keypad, and it shorted out and the machine exploded. So like then 60 issues later, it turned out Sonic from the future had come back in time to pull that cable. Because for the listeners at home, the Metallics had traveled back in time and removed the rotten egg from the fridge that would irradiate Kinterball along with the Chaos Emeralds and transform them. So he never became Robotnik, and they ruled the planet in his stead. So Sonic had to make sure it happened because the alternative was worse.
On that note, speech impediment. Do you like him saying eggs in all his sentences, or do you not?
Never minded it.
Never minded it? No?
It didn't hang around for that long.
It was
No,
in the
I mean,
early issues.
Yeah, Stringer kind of did it a bit more later on,
Mhm.
but it was never really something Kitching did. But I mean, I never bothered because I mean he's ridiculous anyway. Robotnik is never not ridiculous. You know, if you're not embracing the ridiculous along with this franchise with silly little things like that, then you're taking it too seriously. You know?
Yeah, completely. I mean, I always remember the one issue where Robotnik comes out of the ground swarming with badniks, and he's basically sitting in an Egomatic.
Yeah.
It's called an Ego with giant fists on the end, and it's just, I'm gonna crush you.
Yeah, that's the final boss from Sonic 3. That's the final part of their Sonic 3 adaptation. What's it? Robotnik's Revenge.
That's the one.
Yeah, where he comes and actually destroys their secret underground base, and it was like, oh, next phase of the storytelling begins here. They went on the run as Bob Peaky's traveling circus after that.
But the fact is that he's actually sitting in something called the Egomatic with giant fists on it. You know, it's.
Oh, I think that's called an egg mobile or an egg ship or something in Japan. You know, something fucking joyless like that.
Well, it's Eggman.
Yeah, that's like he is an egg man in an egg ship. Oh, the imagination on display with our naming conventions is
just riding along in his egg cup.
Hey.
Although weirdly enough, I never minded the death egg.
Of course, you didn't mind the death egg. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was the. I always wondered how they got away with something as
blatant.
Yeah.
Parody.
That's like you're not even trying, but I don't care because it's cool. It shoots lasers.
It's got the two little holes instead of the one hole.
Yeah.
I was like,
right.
Yeah. But the other thing I wanted to bring up was the Shanzabar storyline.
Oh yeah, well, Shanza.
Yeah, however you pronounce it. I just always went Shanazabar. It just seemed easy. This is a guy who for years called the amalgam age of comics the Amalgam. Just because I couldn't quite get the word right, you know. Shut up.
Mm-hmm.
That was a weird story.
Yeah, this is the.
That was after Robotnik turned into God for the first time, right?
It was Ted Crystal, yeah.
Yeah, he. Wait, no, he was. Wait. Yeah, he turned. No, right. So the first time he got control of the Chaos Emeralds was the Sonic 3 adaptation. That was like 2 pages. That wasn't the story. Then the next time, that was whenever he took over reality and like projected Sonic into a world where Sonic didn't exist, and he brought all his great villains back and everything.
Yes.
Or was that the second time?
Actually,
I can't remember.
now, I think it was the second time.
Yeah, I think that was what happened the second time. And then the first time it didn't last too long. That's right. No, he was gonna get control of them. No, wait, was this? Oh, we're doing very badly here.
This is the problem.
Right,
there is 10 years of comics here.
He turned to Crystal. I remember that.
Mm-hmm.
But that was what happened to him when he tried to control the Emerald's power. And then that was just the end of the story. Then he came back a little later when it turned out there was a chrysalis stage and he was internalizing the power of the Emerald.
That's right.
And
yeah.
that was whenever he did that whole thing and sent them off to the other dimension, brought the old villains back and everything. Because this was a Kitching story. Mm-hmm. And then they drained the power out of him, and it seemed like his body couldn't exist without the power or anything, so it seemed like he'd vanished. But it turned out that he'd shrunken into this submolecular world of Shanazar. And then Stringer did a Chaos Emerald story again later, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah, and then that was and then that led into the zone hopping thing, which ended with Game Over. Yeah, I think that's right. That sounds right.
It's quite difficult to try and remember exactly where this all fits together at times.
I can remember everything up to the end of Return of Chaotix. After that, that's when I started.
But the Shanazabar, I apologize for pronouncing it wrong. It's just how I pronounce it.
There's a B in it.
Yeah. It was truly odd. Start off with, a lot of the villains and heroes were based on existing villains and heroes. And then you had Lord Viper, who was real. Was it Lord Adder? Might have been Lord Adder. Who was really strange.
What describe him? He was just a snake, wasn't he?
Yeah, he was just a snake in a wig.
Yeah. That storyline kind of, I think, wasn't that really smacked of like aborted plans.
Yes.
It's like there was the whole Sonic eventually found Robotnik down there, and it turned out he'd been reverted into Kintabor, and then that never went anywhere. We never found out why.
No.
Or anything. I mean, I guess maybe the reason was because he was blasted with Chaos Emerald radiation to transform him into Robotnik in the first place. So the idea was that it had drained out of him as well. and it was reasserting itself. But there was a mountain full of ghosts, and there was what was their name? There was that team of 3 hunters. Was it Viper who set them on?
Yeah, it was.
What was their name?
Oh, now you're asking questions.
Put me on the spot now because I don't remember.
No, me neither.
Yeah, and no, I definitely seem to remember reading an interview with Kitching where he explained that his plans for them were totally just cut off at the knees.
Yeah.
They amounted to nothing. But that was a weird story arc, and it was probably... I think that was when Kitching left, actually. That got cut short, and then Stringer came in and basically wrote it up until Kitching came back for the finale after that. I think that's when that happened.
Right. Here we go. A series of dimension-hopping adventures by Amy and Techno resulted in Mobius being briefly invaded by Earth military forces.
Oh my god, that was the lamest story, but I loved it.
Yep. Yep. Alliance's betrayals and double crosses culminated in Robotnik's successful capture of the Emeralds in a 4-issue epic where he had godlike powers and reshaped Mobius entirely.
Hang on,
his brain...
Where are you reading this from?
From the Sonic Wiki.
I might have written that. Might have. I'm not saying it or anything, but I think that's copied from Wikipedia where I wrote it years ago after reading the comics.
Which is what I'm reading right now.
I might be wrong. I might not have written it, but I really think I did write it years ago after I read the comics for the first time as an adult.
Oh dear.
Well, we're gonna move on to the entire
No escape from McFeely.
We're gonna move to the entire Shanazar thing because
Crashing.
you've destroyed my brain with that. We're gonna move on to the final thing I want to talk about, Sonic comic. Well, before we move on to the last section, shut up, McFeely.
The plaques. No, carry on.
My brain handled the fact that I've just been telling you things you've written.
I don't. Hang on. I'm looking. I'm just. You carry on. I'm gonna just.
Right, the last thing I want to bring up is it ties into a lot of things we've just been talking about. I want to talk about the Dracon Empire.
Ooh.
Because these were a very strange idea that got brought in right at the beginning, but nobody noticed, and they were there right till the very end, and nobody noticed.
I mean, I don't ever believe that the Sentinel was intended to.
No, not to start with, but it got.
Oh yeah,
nicely.
The Sentinel was around the 30 issue mark.
Not even that, I don't think. Sure,
30s, 20s, 30s, somewhere around there.
I just
Early
scanned
20s.
through the Sentinel. I can't tell you where I read it from.
Obviously, wouldn't be there. I think I want to say it was like right after the Sonic Terminator.
That sounds about right, actually.
That would be late 20s, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
Oh, this is thrilling listening for the folks at home. Arguing about numbers. Yes. 29.
Yeah. So, but the Dracon Empire were an awesome race of fish people. And guess why I like them? Fish. Ended up being one of these things. Ended up becoming Perfect Chaos.
Oh yes, well.
This blew my mind because these guys were bloody jokes. They looked awesome. I love the armor and the design of them. But they were pretty much just jokes. Until one of them got hold of the Chaos Emeralds and went nuts. Became a giant fish creature inside a gigantic mutant water body with fear eyes. I love the fear eyes. The eyes that you fear.
It was truly representative of how far Sonic the Comic had come to the point that its world was just totally irreconcilable with what was going on in the games. Yeah. And it just shrugged and went, fuck it.
Yeah. Well, this is the problem. Sonic Adventure was it had such a big storyline to it.
Yeah.
Which it didn't exist in the games before this point. It was never going to be possible to do. You were never going to be able to reconcile the two. But I just find it interesting that something as small as a small story as the Sentinel ended up sowing the seeds for something that came nearly 6 years later.
Yeah. Well, the Dracons weren't too long after issue 100, were they?
No, they turned up in the Flicky's Island.
Oh, sorry, yeah, they were there.
That's when they made their first proper appearance.
Yeah, hang on. Yeah, just to confirm, I wrote that in May of 2006. Yeah. Fuck me. Fuck me sideways.
Wow.
Nice.
Right. So there we go.
Indeed. Well, I'm going to finish this off then by drawing attention to the fact that Sonic the Hedgehog and friends.
Just before we move off Sonic, there's a very important thing we've not discussed, who was also one of the best original characters that I can't believe we overlooked. And probably Lou Stringer's single greatest contribution to Sonic the comic. Brutus.
Oh, Jesus, yeah.
Can't let it go. Gotta have Brutus.
Oh.
Now, he was only in it a little bit.
Oh,
He was only really in 3 stories.
Yeah. Oh, man, I
And
forgot.
that was right at the height of the... Well, Brutus basically came between the Brotherhood of Metallics and the Return of Chaotix.
Mm-hmm.
That was a good time, you know?
Yeah, definitely.
That was Lou Stringer's most high-stakes story ever, probably. It didn't hurt that it was one of the few that he did that Richard Elson illustrated.
Yeah. Oh, Elson.
Love Brutus. Brutus was a trooper badnik who was programmed with Dr. Robotnik's brain patterns to be like the ultimate enemy for Sonic, and he had anti-gravity powers, and it was awesome. And he was golden, and he had a cape. He had a cape, kids.
He had a cape.
And
a great big red cape.
And it turned out at the end of his introductory story that he had inherited Robotnik's ambition along with his thought patterns, and that he now planned to take over Mobius and depose Dr. Robotnik. And he was basically in one more story where he was putting his army together, and then a final story where he actually made his big play, and Dr. Robotnik put on a battle suit and took him on. It was awesome.
That brings me up to another one that...
But then the battle suit one, I remember that was just after I stopped reading the comic again. And I was like, oh, God, why? And it's like, I reflect now, and I'm like, why didn't I start just picking that up again? And that was my OCD at an early age. I missed issues.
See, you've reminded me, and I'm just trying to find which issue they arrived in. Do you remember the Robotnik repair team?
Oh, yes, Cam and Bert.
Yeah.
Oh,
that was,
I can't remember which issue they...
Well, that was a Sonic's World in the 30s?
Yeah,
I want to say the 30s.
Wasn't there a scene where he kicks them out before he cocoons himself? Because they suggested...
No, they didn't exist yet. No, they were just his image consultants. They were just 2 guys.
Oh,
Cam and Bert were a cat and a bull who were the guys. They were the ones who went around the zones repairing badniks. They were Barf, the badnik army repair functionaries.
That's the one.
Ah, there you go.
I found them, yeah.
They were only in like 2 stories as well.
31. But these 2 were fantastic. If nothing else, just for Bert beating up the mutant badniks.
There's another aborted plot point for you. Remember the 7 badniks?
Yeah.
They cannibalized versions of like Palm Tree Panic and Green Hill badniks together to make super badniks, and they kicked all the badniks' asses in the Palm Tree Panic zone, I think, on the Miracle Planet, and then we never saw them again. The idea was that they were delay and wait. Sonic knew too much about what badniks to expect in what zones, so they were gonna mix it up with these new powerful badniks, and then never heard word of them again. I think they were Stringer creations, weren't they? That seems right.
Yes, yeah, they were definitely Stringer creations. Oh man, I've just found.
And there's another example of actual Mobians who were on Robotnik's side.
Yeah, and I love the idea of them. I love the idea that there's just these guys who they have a job.
Yeah.
I've just found a picture of Nuts and Bolt, and I'm so gonna have to change my Twitter avatar. I love Nuts and Bolt.
Head wheels activated. He just kept winding up in these situations where his head got chopped off. And he had these little wheels that would pop out and his head would drive away.
You also had characters that kind of worked for both as well, like the Omniviewer.
Oh, I love the Omniviewer. There's another one how do we not mention the omnipotent Omniviewer, who came out of nowhere in issue 8, didn't reappear until the Chaotix story in Knuckles, like 3 years later, something like that. 60, something like that. No, I guess it probably wasn't that much later, really. When did Knuckles have? Late mid-50s, thereabouts. So that's 2 years or thereabouts.
Yeah.
And I never got an origin ever.
There was just to surmise the sort of things the Omniviewer did. I read actually prior to this podcast, about 5 minutes prior to it actually, where the Omniviewer, because he's still working for Robotnik, he saves Sonic's life So he takes them away. But because he's still technically doing what Robotnik asked him to do, he literally drops them off in the middle of a Badnik fight. So he's literally, you saved Sonic's life, but he's just said, well, I'm doing what Robotnik's technically told me to do, so yeah, I've kind of dropped you in the middle of all this shit.
Him into the middle of the fight. The idea was Robotnik told him to take Sonic away through space and time so he would be gone forever, you know. And the Omniviewer, he obeyed, and that he took him through time, but he just took him 6 months into the future. And it was that 6-month time gap that allowed Robotnik to conquer the planet and set up the status quo of the next 91 issues.
Yeah. So, yeah, the Omniviewer.
Loved that dude. I mean, he had powers over space. No explanation for where he came from at all, ever. Despite the massive significance the character would actually go on to have in the post-Brotherhood of Metallics timeline. Well, basically from the Chaotix onward. I mean, he was key to everybody traveling through time, and when Sonic got trapped in the Special Zone because Omni was imprisoning Super Sonic. I mean, that's not. We haven't even talked about Running Wild or any of the time spent in the Special Zone.
Right, we're gonna quickly go through the Running Wild storyline, and then we're going to have to leave this.
Probably should have sat down and broken this up into little micro chunks to talk about in a vaguely chronological order. Because
in theory,
we basically hit all the major epochs here, but we have jumped over the deposition of Robotnik. We've basically covered everything. We just sort of jumped from the Return of Chaotix to the deposition of Robotnik, skipping that Special Zone saga in the middle.
Wow.
Covered it otherwise, basically, I think.
It's just one of those things. The idea was never to go this in depth, unfortunately.
There was no getting around it, was there?
No. Now that becomes obvious. Now that becomes obvious. But anyhow, so, right, tell you what. We're going to draw a line under the sun there for Sonic.
Yeah. Because we got
I do intend to have almost the second part of this, a supplemental coming at some point.
But Running Wild had Super Sonic.
Go on then. Right.
No, I'm just messing.
You can save that for another time.
Another time.
Part 7 of this
arc anyway. It was full of Kitching. I think did the start and finish, and then Stringer did all the weird Marvel parodies in between. Yeah. It wasn't a great arc or anything.
No, but
yeah,
it involved Super Sonic and the return of which.
Yes, I mean that's enough, really, isn't
it? the return of Super Sonic in itself is just awesome. But, if you're interested in reading these, try and find them. You can find them.
They're out there. Yeah, believe us. If you were to contact one of us, we might even be able to imply where.
Yes, yeah. I will happily help anybody.
There's no point dancing around this. This shit isn't available anywhere.
No.
I'll tell you a little story when we finish recording.
Yes.
Okay.
One of which I've known for quite some time, and we can't actually mention much of that here.
Oh.
I'm just gonna quickly shout out some things here. Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Kid Chameleon, Eternal
This is what I was coming
Champions.
to next.
That's what he's coming to. He's getting there.
Golden Axe, Decap Attack, Pirate STC, Marco's Magic Football, Wake Up the Dolphin, Run the Boys, Sparks, Moon Lake Football,
Shut the fuck up, I'm going to kick you.
I
was going to ask you all a question to bow us out with, which was, there wasn't all just about Sonic. There were other strips based on other Sega games. I want to know your favourites.
Oh God, that's a hard one.
Just keep it to 2, I think, because I wasn't here for hours.
Just 2.
Oh yeah.
Do you want me to go first?
You go first. You obviously have an answer.
Oh yes, completely. The first one is Kid Chameleon.
Oh yes.
Because Kid Chameleon was dark.
Yeah, I've actually decided that was my favorite. Now that you've said the words out loud. Yeah, I loved Kid Chameleon.
One of the best.
Another one that didn't get a bastard finale.
No, he really didn't.
Also, one of the best art in the book's line as well, in my opinion.
I never drew that, but it did look good. Was it John Burns drew that?
Don't know.
I have to go back in and have a look.
Let me see if credits are included in any of these files. Go ahead, yeah.
Should be at the beginning. But yeah, the Kid Chameleon storyline, it just got darker and darker and darker.
Brian Williamson.
And then it introduced Berserker.
I
And I always remember just call me Berserker. And you sit there going, oh dear God.
remember very few of his actual identities. What was it? Red Shadow or
Red
something?
Tornado.
Red Tornado. Really?
No, it was Red Shadow was the ninja.
Yeah, Red Tornado
was
is
the guy with
Red
the wind
Tornado.
tunnels.
No, that Red Tornado is a DC Comics android.
No. Red Shadow was the ninja.
Yeah.
Tornado was the guy with the
Oh,
wind.
sorry, Tornado was the yeah. And there was the Micromax was the
Yep.
flat guy.
Yep.
And Iclops.
Yep, there was Cyclops.
I think that's all I can remember.
My two favorites were always Berserker and Maniacs.
Maniacs, yes.
I loved Maniacs. The other one...
It was just so hauntingly terrifying, Kid
It
Chameleon.
really was.
It was the story... I don't remember exactly what the video game was about, but this was about a kid who actually got sucked into a video game. It was kind of like Dungeons and Dragons, where like the kids go to do a game or a ride and they get sucked in. One thing I always wondered about Dungeons and Dragons when I watched the cartoon was, so does this mean every kid who went on this ride got sucked into this hellish netherworld? And I think they did an episode later in Dungeons and Dragons about so some other kids did. But with Kid Chameleon, they were like, yes, this evil, vicious video game is out to suck in as many kids as it can. And the second Kid Chameleon story, because he got to come back for a second, was about him having to go in and rescue some kids who'd been sucked into the game, but he didn't come out at the end of the second one. And they said, "Do you want to see how the story ends? Oh, you better write us some letters." Then they're basically holding the bastard end of the story to ransom.
Yeah.
And obviously, he gave enough fucks about Kid Chameleon like I did, because we never got to find out how it ended.
Yeah, it's always one of the big shames of that series. You never found out how it went.
How Casey defeated the voice.
Unfortunately, the big change was that they were going to just keep it pure Sonic, so a lot of things just got kicked to the curb.
It was quite a bit before then, wasn't it, that they did the second Kid Chameleon? No?
Yeah.
Even then, though, really, I guess the Sonic Superstar strips for the Sega strips were kind of on the fade.
Yeah.
I think it was because at that point the Mega Drive had Genesis to our American listeners had kind of started to fade out at that point. It was a Mega Drive, damn it. Genesis is a silly name. It's a Mega Drive. It's full of blast processing.
Was a band. So what was your second one?
The second one is a complete turnaround because it's Decap Attack.
Oh, well, who could?
Because there are a few things in the world which to this day make me laugh as hard as Decap Attack.
I to be honest, the Decap Attack didn't even come to my mind when I was thinking about the other one, because it is so not one of those. It outlived everything else. It was kind of Kitching's pet project almost. He was doing it way. I mean, it was a poor game that had no great reception. And,
the game is just pants. The game is utter goddamn pants.
But they kept doing Decap Attack strips long after they stopped doing anything else, and it was legitimately funny. You know?
Yeah.
Professor Frankenstein.
Igor, bring me the brain.
I would also say, because of the art in the comic, it wouldn't have been out of place being in a Cosgrove Hall cartoon.
No,
completely not. Completely. It has that kind of feel to it.
You're very right, actually, now that I think about it. It's total. Bring me the brain, Igor. Prof, why do you talk like that? Everyone knows you come from Cardiff.
It was the fact that the freaking devil had his lawnmower.
To this
day. Yep.
Return my lawnmower. I never borrowed your lawnmower. What do you get when you clone a being who has only half ein brain?
Is he going to be a Blockbusters contestant then?
That's what you get.
It's just joy, utter goddamn joy. I love it.
I haven't had this much fun since I censored him with a censored and then him with a soggy end. It was vile as well. Like it had these slightly more not adult, but like you know those kids comics that were maybe for early teenagers who would be able to use the words poo and bottom and things like that. It had those kinds of leanings, but it was really quite smart and funny.
Yeah, it's one of those things where to be this daft, you've got to be clever.
Yes, and Kitching drew that one.
Yeah, and it just looks. The entire thing of Decap Attack is just a perfect package. Yeah, the way it looks wouldn't have worked without the writing. The writing wouldn't have worked without the way it looks. It's just perfection. I mean, they tried to do it again with the pirate stuff, Yeah, the Fez Head and Skull.
I liked Pirate STC. It's not one of my favorites or anything,
No,
but it wasn't like crazy clever. It was tripped out.
Oh, completely.
Mm-hmm.
Who did that actually? Let me just look up who was responsible for that.
Who was responsible for that?
What's he doing that?
This.
Mr.
You may
Matsey.
remember, kids in the UK, that Pirate STC. Well, you probably don't. But when the Sega CD launched, it was advertised by a large fat man in a fez on a computer-generated skull.
The large fat man in the Fez was actually the devil in the Christopher Eccleston Jesus storyline.
Well, good for him.
So it's the only other thing I've ever seen him in.
But that was turned into a strip, apparently. You know, that's what they thought they could do.
The art in its
an art
walls.
by Stephen Bliss. Oh, it's the warpedest thing.
Yeah.
Well, it's basically, but it is. I mean, it's about these kids, couch potatoes, who are sucked into their television by Fez Head and Skull, and just made to sort of play through a twisted kind of video game where the most bizarre stuff can and will happen.
So, Matt.
Well, you took one of my options, and we've chatted about it.
Anyway.
Decap Attack, I've just started reading, and I enjoy it very much. So Decap Attack is definitely up there. Kid Chameleon is definitely up there. Another thing, just got to say quickly about Kid Chameleon, a lot of the characters modelled on Marvel characters. Because as the one that shoots the eye beams, you could tell there's a parody of Cyclops there.
They're all based on the ones from the game, so
They were all in the game, but
but drawn and acted out to be like homages to these Marvel characters.
A lot of the sort of cartoony aspects of the game was very much downplayed.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I mean, there's the one where he's large, he's green-skinned, he's wearing purple tights. It's the bloody Hulk.
With
Yeah.
the rhino's hat.
Yeah, with the rhino's hat. Anyway, yeah, but the art in Kid Chameleon, absolutely good. Another one that I'm just starting to read now. I mean, as of today, because I never really thought much of the backup strips, but I've just started reading just to give them their dues. Street of Rage. Now, the first part of that's pretty dark.
That is the one thing above anything else in Sonic the Comic that got including the Sonic strips, that got the closest to being like for teens edging into adults. You know, that was the one that really, really pushed the edge. Sometimes it's like, you know, there would be cut off swears and things, and you were like, "Oh, Mark Miller, you're such a cheeky wag," and it's like, look where it got him. Look what happens when you stop letting Mark Miller cut off his swears.
Oh dear. Again, the art in it, very, very good. Very good. And I believe, if somebody can clarify it for me, Mr. McFeely, the art was actually done by somebody who worked in 2000 AD, and I can't remember his name.
Hang on, Streets of Rage started in the second run of strips, didn't it?
Yes.
Let's see.
I have a feeling I've seen that art crop up on Judge Dredd at some point.
His name was Peter Richardson. Ring any bells?
It kind of does, but like I said, I recognise it more for the art than I do the person, if you know what I mean. It's like the sort of art that you've seen pop up in British comics.
Oh, yes, it's very British. But everything about Sonic the Comic was very British. You'd never mistake this for, you know, an American publication.
No,
yeah,
definitely not.
It was everything stylistically about it was just so British.
So that, like, the first part alone, Axel gets beaten up to a bloody pulp, dumped in the river, and then he's in a coma fed to a drip. Now, come on. Seriously. For that for comic geared towards, like, 10-year-olds, that's heavy stuff.
I remember thinking that even at the time, that I was like, this is the exciting... This is the funny thing. I don't think I ever really understood what was happening in Streets of Rage. No. I don't think the story really had me hooked, but I was like, oh, maybe he's almost going to say bastard this issue.
Streets of Rage suffers really from the same limitations that was imposed upon Golden Axe. Now, Golden Axe was meant to be, which is why I find it a really disappointing series. It had the potential to be so much more, but because it was geared towards the age group and demographic it was edged towards, they had to put a leash on it. And that's what it doesn't depress me, but it makes me feel disappointed in the strip because the art in Golden Axe, damn good. It's just the story.
Golden Axe came back for a second go round, didn't it?
Yes, it did.
Yeah, because I just came in at the very end of the first run of strips, and I remember Shinobi came back twice.
3 times, each one based on each of the games. So you.
No, I mean, it came back twice, so there were 3 separate. Strips, I remember. But Golden Axe only got 1 more go round, didn't it?
Yeah. It's sort of a shame because I thought there was a lot more in Golden Axe than there was in goddamn Wonder Boy Monster Land.
I was actually going to say on the other end there is also Wonder Boy, which I don't mind the art to. The art at least is nice and colourful. It pops. It's great. Storyline is what the hell.
I was going to ask you guys, like, what are the dumpest ones? What are your least favorite?
Wonder Boy.
Wonder Boy was probably the first.
Shut up.
Jeez, what are my favorites then? You've taken them, but really, it was Kid Chameleon and Decap Attack would have been the 2 I would have picked. I enjoyed Eternal Champions quite a bit.
For what it did, definitely.
Yeah.
It certainly tried to do
it was
some very
kind
interesting
of a
things.
wanky game. But it had quite a high concept going on. But then it was like, we have zero idea how to mine the setup of this game for more ideas. And I think it came back for 1 more story, and it was just about the sexy ninja and the trenchcoat PI up doing something. That's it. Yes, I couldn't remember their names if you paid me. Coming back to just have a team up. For no apparent reason, and that actually, but they really put a lot of weight behind that because that got a special, didn't it? That got a one-off issue. Yeah,
it did.
I remember I played that game quite a bit because of Sonic the Comic. Like that was. This is the funny thing when it comes to the games is I was a Sonic child. None of that old Mario for me. I was reared on a Mega Drive, but I played very little Sonic. Now I had Sonic 1. And I played, but everything else was rented or borrowed. I never owned any of the other console Sonic games.
No, that was the same. I couldn't afford to. Simply put.
I was pretty much the same up until the mid-90s where I had a job and basically bought our own Sega stuff. So I got all of my stuff then. But other than that, went to a friend's place, played all the Sega stuff.
Cartridges cost £60 ago.
Well, funny you should say that. Just yesterday, I watched an episode of Games Master, and you had Dominic Diamond going through a Virgin Megastore, and he was like, he picked up the X32 and says, "This will be yours at a snip of £70." It was like, what?
Could you believe
the rancid black mushroom that is Rumble.
Let's see what others aside from Eternal Champions. Again, I was pulled into Echo the Dolphin for the sheer weirdness of Echo the Dolphin.
Always found that strip a little meh. It wasn't my thing.
It was odd. It was very placid, like the game. It was actually really good at capturing the tone of the game. It was kind of strange, but very placid and pretty to look at. And then sometimes there were aliens.
You are welcome to say things that have already been mentioned if you so wish.
I don't know what else I have to say about Decap Attack. Covered that well on Kid Chameleon. What else was there? Anybody got a list?
I just went through a list, but Adam was telling me to shut up.
Just sped through it. I remember Shinobi I quite enjoyed, but I just enjoyed it. It was never.
Yeah, basically Shinobi, Streets of Rage, Kid Chameleon, Eternal Champions, Golden Axe, Decap Attack, Pirate STC, Marco's Magic Football.
No, that's the dumbest.
That probably was the weakest, yeah. I mean, it was bad to look at as well, but I don't think that was actually the artist's fault. He was just copying the look of the game. But that was that the last? No, well, Shining Force was the last. Well, not counting Decap Attack. Because I remember Shining Force happened after was the next issue after I wasn't going to buy the comic. But Marco, I think was the second to last.
Don't know. I'll just.
Mutant League Football!
Oh, Christ!
Mutant League Football! Bring me the head of Coach Bricker!
We're going to play 33, 44, 77. How does he know my measurements?
Now, I don't remember a lot about it, and I can't even remember any of the jokes off the top of my head, but I just remember really enjoying it. What was the name of that drink they all drank? Diet Paste? Now with all the flavor of something. I don't remember what it was.
I don't think it was paste. It had a rude sounding word.
Yeah, something like that. back and read all of that. Read me more names there, Matt. What else was there?
Out of the rest that we've already talked about, you had the Mega Droid series, which was basically the mascot for Sonic the Comic, who eventually got his own strip. Shining Force, which we talked about. Mutant League Football, that we were talked about. Sparkster, which is now known more commonly as Rocket Knight Adventures.
Now, the interesting thing about Sparkster,
Rocket Knight Adventures originally, the game, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, and then they used all the designs and everything from the second game for that strip, didn't they?
They don't even try and work out that one.
But I'm trying to remember.
Rocket Knight Adventures is just a mess.
I think Sparkster was the actual name of the game we originally had at one point, at least in the European market. I believe. I don't know, but I just remember it as Rocket Knight.
Yeah, I definitely owned it, and it was Rocket Knight Adventures. Yeah. I think there was a sequel and it was called Sparkster. But
yeah, there was two sequels. There was Rocket Knight Adventures 2 and Sparkster.
Anything else on the list, man?
That's basically it. You know about Decap Attack and all that. That is
well
it.
Then.
Yeah, the rest of the backup strips were basically Sonic based. So
yeah.
Well, I think we have. I would like to say we've mined this to death, but unfortunately, even after 2 hours nearly, we haven't even touched the surface of the main point of all of this. So,
what was the main point? The Sonic stuff?
Yeah,
it's basically saying.
Sorry.
I was just going to say, the main point is, people, if you are of discerning mind, go and track down Sonic the Comic. There is no other way for you to get it. There is no trades. So the only way we can suggest is if you do it illegally. Sorry.
You know, we should probably. This is the fun thing. We've only talked about the strips, and the strips were a huge part and probably the big draw of Sonic the Comic. And but for its first couple of years, up until I was still getting it, certainly I know it phased out later on. This really was a magazine with comics in it.
Oh hell yeah!
And that was the big part of it. I mean, it was. It had its mascot character of Mega Droid, who did It was the Tharg of Sonic the Comic. He did the introductory letter columns. Who don't love Mega Droid? He was great. You had the letters page where he would answer your letters. You had
the art.
You had the art pages. You had reviews. Of course, any reviews in an actual official magazine are always a little spacious. You had. You had the cheats, the Q zone, you had the news zone and all of that. And the fact is, I think if Fleetway were to ever actually wind up collecting these strips, they would lose a little something by not being complete, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I always thought that the review section of Sonic the Comic was somewhat influenced by Games Master. It had the same sort of setup.
A little bit cheeky.
Yeah.
It's a good way of putting it. I like that.
You really did feel like it's the same thing that any UK comic that did that whole thing with the idea with the Tharg type character, but you really did feel like you were part of something a little bigger whenever you were a regular reader of Sonic the Comic. You did feel like you belonged to a special little club where you were welcomed back every issue by somebody who talked directly at you out of the comic.
Well, it was that, and it was also the fact that it also said, hey, you're not alone. Look at these celebrities that also love Sega. And I posted a picture to Adam on Twitter during this very podcast. Look, right said Fred.
Icons of the time.
Apologies, I haven't been paying attention to Twitter.
Yes. Yeah, it was I read other magazines at the time. I say read, I certainly purchased and looked at, or had purchased for me, really. At the time, I was only wee. Things like, remember Look In magazine?
Yeah, brief, yes,
I basically read the strips and kind of looked at the entertainment bits in that. Sonic the Comic was read cover to cover multiple times.
Yeah.
Oh. Absolutely. Even all the boring bits with the words in. It was a whole package, and even if you didn't care about the game and the games being talked about or the news being talked about, and never had any intention of doing X, Y, and Z, it was something you really. I was going to say you don't get it in kids comics anymore, but it never really did go away, because kids comics in the UK are still strips and features and everything, but they're of a different caliber.
we still have them in a way. We still have these type of comics. However, they are slimmed down to the nine. They really are slimmed down. I think of
Dumbed down.
the most recent examples of this is like the Marvel stuff, like the Avengers comic that's out, the Spider-Man comic. Even though we got some fantastic people who worked on that, Mr. Simon Williams, I doff my cap to you. Stuff like that. It's definitely part of like a dying end of what we had back in the 90s and 80s.
I mean, Sonic the Comic was really probably the last great colossus of the UK comics industry. Because let's not be mistaken here. When Sonic the Comic was at its peak, it was huge.
Absolutely.
Completely.
You know, it was to the 90s what the Transformers comic was to the 80s.
Yeah.
This was outselling 2000 AD territory. Like, this was huge.
Sonic, Sega was like a huge, huge thing in the early 90s. It really was. I remember more stuff coming. 90s. Yeah, sorry, 90s. There was more stuff.
Oh, you said 90s. I'm just going.
Yeah, I know. I just remember
Fresh Prince of Bel-Air.
I remember more things coming out of Sega's input in this sort of like bubble than I do Nintendo, even with the release of the Super Nintendo. All I remember is like all those commercials that came out on television, you know, hardcore pimping out Sega. They were,
they were the cool company.
Sega,
and that was, I mean, a lot of that was inherited off of Sonic, who was cool and designed to appeal to the young people of today.
Well, I think of it a little bit differently to that. I think of basically Sega as the rock and roll people to the more acceptable family geared role that Nintendo found itself in. You know, they were the accepted establishment, and then suddenly Sega basically kicked down the door. If you know what I mean.
I'll definitely agree with that. That's a really good analogy. And look, and then you look, you know, hey, where's it got Nintendo? And look at Sega.
Yeah.
That's the problem. Sega burnt themselves out far too quickly. They just threw. Once the ship started sinking, they just threw thing after thing after thing after thing, and it never worked. It's a shame because, as I still say, that the Dreamcast is one of the finest consoles ever made.
Yeah. The main thing though is you're always Nintendo will always come out with a gimmick, and a gimmick that will sell. The thing about Sega is they are at the forefront. They were a games company. That's the thing. You had gimmicks, you had peripherals, but
not as much back then.
Leading.
I mean, I wouldn't say gimmick for Nintendo. I would say innovation. Really, I mean, Nintendo are the ones making the leaps and bounds in technology.
The closest that Sega ever really got to that was the Sega CD, because if it wasn't for the Sega CD, we wouldn't have the Sony PlayStation.
No, if it wasn't for Nintendo and Sony falling out, we wouldn't have the Sony PlayStation.
Well, you know what I mean, but Sega was there first. It
CDs for games!
Yeah.
Which Nintendo ignored for the longest time.
As long as they
not gonna do it!
No, console, cartridges, we can't charge £60 otherwise. Right,
well, I think it's about time that we pull this to a screeching halt. Because otherwise we're going to end up getting ourselves into a conversation that we can't get back out of. And this will be the world's first 24-hour podcast. And it'll be still on Sonic and Sega.
Hey, I could do it.
Yeah, that's the problem. I know.
Really could. It really does feel like we barely scratched the surface of what we were going to talk about with Sonic there, even though we did touch all the bases.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping that we've touched enough to get people interested to go back and find some of this stuff. Or, you know, give us a shout on Skype or Twitter.
Yeah, everybody go to Adam. Adam. No one else. Adam. Bug Adam.
And Chris.
Possibly support such activity, but Adam could.
Yes. Every one of you. Come in your hundreds. He will deal with every single one of you.
I'll bloody well do it as well, don't you? You worry about that. But before we go, there's something I do want to quickly draw attention to. And that is Sonic the Comic Online.
Oh, yes. How could we not? Yes, we must.
Because it's not completely gone. A very, very, very lovely bunch of people have managed to keep it going, kind of, with online issues. Completely fan-made, completely fan-written.
And this was a couple of years after the comic stopped. Now, the comic stopped with issue 224, 224, 225, thereabouts. And the original strip stopped a little while before that.
Yeah.
And it carried on full reprint for a while. So the online version, they've picked up from where the numbering stopped even with the reprints counted in.
And I do recommend, once you've read the entirety of Sonic the Comic, you should go to stconline.co.uk and give them a shout out, because good bunch of people and they're doing a great job over there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean they're really interested in trying to recapture what it was and what we were talking about. They've got Megadroid. He hosts the introduction page. You are welcomed back every issue. They used to have a letters page, but now they've just given it up and had a forum, which well.
Yeah, it kind of have to in this day and age, unfortunately.
I mean, the issues only come out quite intermittently. They've picked up the pace significantly for the last couple. Obviously, it's all done for free and it's all done in their free time. So, obviously. And at the very start, they had they still follow the old rules: 7 pages for Sonic, 5 pages for everyone else.
Yep.
In their first issue, they did have 4 strips, but they've never been able to keep that pace up since. And there's just anything between 2 to 4 strips in an issue. They've crossed through the comic's 18th birthday, Sonic's 20th anniversary, Sonic's 15th anniversary, actually. I think they've crossed over as well. They've been going that long. They have carried on the sentiment in that they have adapted the games. The first thing they did was the first make they did Sonic Adventure 2. They brought in a very different version of Shadow, a very different origin of Shadow.
Yeah, very likable. Not likable, but very interesting. Much more interesting than the game version.
Deeply rooted in because the game version could never work. Again, it's deeply rooted in the mythology of Sonic the Comic. They have answered questions that have bugged me forever about Sonic the Comic and where Knuckles came from and all that. They've still never answered the one that's immediately above all others, though, which is how did the Chaos Emeralds become split? I still long for the answer to that question, but maybe they'll plan to answer it. They've adapted that. They've recently brought in Blaze and Silver.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Those are really the major adaptations. I mean, they've nodded in the direction of things like Sonic Shuffle and Sonic Free Riders. And
yeah. I'm just looking at it now, and there's even a backup strip for the House of the Dead here.
Yes, I think they did one for Rystar as well. I think those are the only 2 Sega properties they've ever done strips for. But yeah, and they seem at the minute to be working towards an adaptation of Sonic 2006. With the work of Blaze and Silver, and we've seen some glimpses into the future that imply, again, the terrible future with the Iblis in the Sonic 2006. They've implied that might be Super Sonic in the future, where Sonic truly loses control and destroys the world, and they have to come back in time to stop him from losing control, stuff like that. No sign of the Weirhog. Oh well.
It's amazing you just managed to make me twitch twice in 1 second.
Iblis Weirhog.
Ow, ow. Triple R.
Yes, I mean it's not perfect. Sometimes it has gorgeous art. Sometimes it has woeful art. But it does strive to constantly replicate the feel and tone, right down to the occasional oddly placed Britishism.
Yep.
And the random pop culture references that only work in their time.
They've
and if nothing else, there's also a Big the Cat strip.
Yes, that also happened.
They've even got poster mags here. They've still got poster mags.
I mean, they're not even poster mags. That's the great thing. It's just like when they need to put out a special, they used to just call it a poster mag. Poster goes, readers at home. Sonic the Poster Mag was a. Remember when you used to get poster mags? They
I used to
fold
get
it out into an A1
one.
poster. Yeah, so they had those, and they did a few online ones as well, which weren't posters at all, but they still obeyed the page count rules.
They did. To this day, I still would love to see some of the sketches from the first poster mag of some of the unused character designs from the unused Sonic the Hedgehog cartoon series be used for something. There's a little hedgehog with a headband, and I love him.
The online did use the Flicky design for a character.
Yes, it did.
Mm-hmm.
It's been very sporadic and a little all over the place. The online version lately, but it seems to be pulling its socks up as we head now into the second half of this year, or we come to in the second half of this year, past I should say. And it's really, if you're really looking to recapture some nostalgia, well, to be honest, you probably know about it already, but it's well worth your time.
Well, so I'm just hoping to bring these things to people's attention more than anything else.
Yeah.
So anyway, with that, I think it's time that we close this down, and I'll say, Mr. McFeely, where can people find you if they so wish to bother you for Sonic the Hedgehog issues?
Why, I'm right here.
Yeah.
Well, also on the internet.
If you look outside your window, a queue is forming.
Oh, God! They've come for me. I'm on Twitter and Facebook it's my name, Chris McFeely. I'm not interesting that way. And I'm always around on the forums. Over on the wiki if you're looking for me. Not the Sonic wiki, although apparently I've done some stuff that's made its way over there.
I was going to say, yes, the Sonic forums.
Wrote that on Wikipedia, 2006, and it has apparently been copied over to the Sonic wiki. I think I may have written one or two little things in between time on the Sonic wiki directly, but yeah, you started reading that out to me, and I was like, that sounds familiar. It sounds like my tone of voice.
Well, there you go, ladies and gentlemen. That's been the highlight of my week, right there. Jesus. Matt, where can people find you?
You can find me kicking the living daylights out of Adam's psyche, although I do believe that Chris has actually managed to do that tonight. So I think he wins this night. In the eternal struggle that is Adam versus Matt, Chris McFeely is the victor tonight.
Give it and flip the table over. Nah, ran off again. Sonic, am I right? Yeah, woo, woo, woo.
Twitch. I think I just got beaten. Twitch.
But other than that, you can find me on the Nerdsphere Network. That's thenerdsphere.blogspot.com or thenerdsphere.madmooseforum.com, where you can find the forums. Please post. We need more posters. You may find me again.
We need poster mags.
Poster mags. We need them A1. A1 sized. back like they used to be back in the day. You can find me on the old oil house. You can find me on the Icon where I broke Adam. I'm too scared to go on Icon 201 because I know that Tricky is a hard egg to break. You may find me on the Odd Podcast because we are doing a podcast that I can't talk about yet because we haven't done it yet.
Well, Matt, with you on it, it's sure to be an odd podcast.
Oh, well, yeah, especially when you find me with Adam. That tends to be a weird one. And having said that, go over to see on the Shut Up and Watch This podcast, which I edit and occasionally appear on. There is a thing called The Introvault, Episode 0, where you can see the breaking down of my sanity by a Mr. Adam. And all I can say is, fish heads, yummy,
Holy
yummy.
Holy fish heads, fish heads, eat them up, yum.
And the moment where I realised that Final Fantasy VII, the remake, is not
real.
Yeah, it's not real.
It's a lie.
The dickhead is a lie. Yes.
So if you ever want to hear me absolutely piss myself at one man completely missing the point of something that's ever been said, go listen to that.
Yeah, it's good. But anyway, you can also find me on YouTube while I've still got the forum here under Timey to Wimey. That's Timey, the number 2, Wimey. Sounds like Scotty Too Hotty, only I'm better. And that's it. Oh, and Twitter,
do the worm.
The same thing. I did the worm on you.
Anyhow, moving on. So yeah, thank you very much, guys, for coming on. As always.
Wait, just before we go, Adam, what we should plug is the Underbase review.
Oh, that's a very good point. We should. If you've ever wanted to hear hate, vile hate, pure vitriol pour forth from two men's mouths, you should go to the Underbase.
And various other orifices.
You should hear. I'm not even going to say anything else. I'm just going to leave it as, go listen to the Underbase Timelines Issue 7 review. Oh, God.
Yeah.
Oh, God.
I'd like to think that people from Fun Pub have listened to it. I have no reason to believe they have, but it's the kind of hate where I'm not normally mean-spirited like that, but it's the kind of hate where I want you to know how bad you've done.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll be very interested to come to next year's review. If Matt will allow me back on, that is.
Why wouldn't he? It's tremendous.
We've had this letter from Fun Pub.
Can you write for us?
Your command of language is far more superior than ours.
You have understood this idea of compression in words.
I cannot possibly understand how you would do that. It is amazing.
Oh, I think I've just thrown up a little bit in my mouth.
Do you ever wonder if those old synthesizers where you type and a voice comes out? Just do that with the Timelines comic, and then just see the superiority in acting out there. I am Optimus Prime.
I don't even want to talk about it anymore.
There's like
so
an hour
much.
and a half to 2 hours of hate pre-recorded out there. So go check that out.
Oh man. Well, thank you very much, guys, for coming on. It has
A
been an
delight.
absolute blast.
Yes.
Pleasure.
As I say, we do have a supplement stroke addendum coming up at some point because there was somebody who couldn't be here tonight, which I do really...
Could you imagine how long it would have been if he was?
Oh dear Lord.
Oh yeah.
But so there is going to be a second part to this where we're probably going to pick a couple of storylines and talk about them a little bit more in depth. But we'll see how that goes. Thank you very much for hanging on for this long, especially if you've never read Sonic the Comic, because this has probably been the most baffling thing in the world to ever hear.
Yep.
Oh man.
But I'm thinking...
Also, if you have never read Sonic the Comic, we're so sorry for you. You must fix this.
If you have children, show them this.
All you people that weren't born in the 90s or raised in the 90s, we're so sorry for you. Because you also missed out on the excellence that is Dominic Diamond.
That might not be the worst thing in the world.
Shut up. It was awesome.
So good night, everybody. Thank you very much for listening. Bye-bye now.